I told him, I said, you know what? You shouldn't let me beat up on him like that. It's like, yeah, I'm going to tell you. Oh, still fine with that X. Yeah. Yeah. Mostly domestic stuff now. 7 things over. On the ability. 7 things over. National stuff. Yeah. Oh, just everything. It's just wherever. Oh yeah. Asia. The Airbus is in Vietnam right now. They've got 76 Airbus is in transition to 76 out of Hong Kong.
That's on now.
And Vietnam.
It's on.
Yeah, but we would go like around the world, or it might be back around the same way.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is loud. Please find your seats. We'll start momentarily. Also, if you have not done so already, please silence your smart devices. Thank you. Just a couple of ROEs. Restrooms are located throughout the building. There's 2 in the back. And we will have a 15-minute intermission following our third speaker. So good afternoon, and welcome to the 44th Annual Freedom Flyer Reunion and the 20th Annual POW MIA Symposium. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Jason Green, your narrator for today's event. Before we begin, I would like to thank the commander of the 12th Flying Training Wing, Colonel Joel Carey, and his wife, Mindy, and the commander of the 12th Operations Group, Colonel Hoope Etheridge, and for their support of this year's symposium. At this time, thank you. At this time, we would also like to extend a warm welcome to all of the distinguished guests, family, and friends attending today's ceremony. Although time does not permit us to recognize all of them individually, we do thank you for attending. We do have some special guests with us today. If you could hold your applause until the end, please. Major General Rodney Kelly, United States Air Force, retired. Major General Edward Meckenbauer, United States Air Force, retired. The Director of Intelligence, Operations, and Nuclear Integration, Headquarters, Air Education and Training Command, Brigadier General John Cherry. Spouse of the Deputy Commanding General, Air Combined Joint Forces Land Component Command, Operation Inherent Resolve, Ms. Mylon Eisler. Brigadier General John Rose, United States Air Force, retired. Brigadier General John Rolston, United States Air Force, retired, and his spouse, Ann. And the Vice Commander, 12th Flying Training Wing, Colonel Michael Snow. And ladies and gentlemen, now if you could please stand for the singing of the national anthem by Airman First Class Linda Kasul, United States Air Force, Band of the West.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you, Airman Kasul, and you may be seated. So this afternoon, we will have 5 speakers, each presenting a part of their experience that stemmed from the Vietnam War, and this is their story. So our first speaker for today is Colonel Ken Cordier, United States Air Force retired. Colonel Cordier was an F-4 Phantom pilot with 175.5 combat missions and more than 500 combat hours over North Vietnam and Laos. In December of 1966, Colonel Cordier's F-4 was shot down by a surface-to-air missile. After ejection, he was captured and remained a prisoner of war for over 6 years until his release on 4 March 1973. His numerous combat decorations include the Silver Star with Oak Leaf Cluster, the Legion of Merit, and the Distinguished Flying Cross. Please help me in welcoming Colonel Ken Cordier.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. Isn't it great to be alive and free? Not to put too fine a point on it, but whoever's responsible for these slides can remove the lieutenant. Get rid of that. Okay, this is where my story begins, or just shortly before. This is taken a week before I was shot down. Typical young fighter pilot. And you know, you can always tell a fighter pilot, right? But you can't tell him much. That was me. Top of my game, I was really enjoying my tour and looked forward to more. Anyway, that's how I looked at that time, and you'll see a slide in a little while at dramatic change. And getting shot down is the most dramatic change of state that you can imagine. This is an artist's depiction of how I described my shoot down. Now, that's me, and this is not right. That looks like a personnel parachute. Actually, the little drogue chute is all that would be there. And right there is Mike Lane, my backseater coming out, his canopy and my canopy. Well, I was on a B-66 escort mission. Took off from Cameron Bay. Everybody aborted except Lee and myself. And we flew up over the Widow's Peak, we called it, of Cambodia, and their heavily defended airspace. Circuited around that and flew up to Orange Anchor and refueled over Thailand. Then we flew up to Channel 97 over Laos and rendezvoused with the KC-9, the RB-66 that we were to escort. And my fault. Anyway, we're flying along at 24,000 feet. We made the turn at Yen Bai, flew up to the Chinese border, down to Hanoi, over to Yen Bai, turned again, and I just rolled out from the turn. I was making a clearing turn looking for MiGs, because that's all I was interested in. There were no SAM calls, so I had no reason to fear. And the radar warning gear, the raw gear, we were not scheduled to get for another month after I was shot down. So we rolled out, looking at making a clearing turn, and all of a sudden there's a thump. And the whole airplane just kind of lurched, and immediately both fire lights went flashing, all the warning lights came on, and I went out of control. Sort of a fishtail, because I was up against the canopy and then down in the seat. And in that short period of time, I knew it was a gut shot. I yelled to my backseater, "We're hit, eject." Poor guy, it was his first mission over North Vietnam. And he was about a mile behind the airplane the whole time. And he said, "Huh?" and immediately became the aircraft commander. Later I talked with him about it, and I said, "What were you thinking?" He says, "Well, I was confused. I thought you said, 'oh shit,' something,' when I had actually said, 'we're hit, eject.'" Well, my canopy went, this is before sequenced ejection. my canopy went, and he felt this blast of wind, saw my seat go out, and realized that he needed to take action. So he pulled his handle, and out he went. And fortunately, he made it. Well, I came out of the airplane and opened my eyes, and the first thing I saw was the phantom blow up. It was really a close call. Then, okay, I'm riding the Martin Baker, right? I looked down between my feet, and I couldn't believe it. Here's another SAM that they had fired two, and the second one blew up just like that below me. And I could see I was headed right for it. Second shit of the day. I looked at that and just had time to close my eyes and hold my breath, and I felt this hot flash, and I was through the fireball. Now, this was a real seminal moment in my life. Later on, as I thought of this many times, I firmly believe that the hand of God was around me that day, because think about the mechanics of a SA2. It's a pretty big thing that's been described as a flaming telegraph pole, a telephone pole. The top of it is pointed like this, where the radar and avionics are, and then below that is about 4.5 feet of gunpowder. And the inside of the missile is lined with rows of steel rods. And when the gunpowder blows up, these rings of rods shatter and go in an expanding ring. And that's what hits your airplane and knocks it down. Well, I had to be at the right angle and the right airspeed in order to go through this expanding ring in the hole of the donut, I call it, and get through there, and not a scratch, not even a John Kerry splinter in my arm. And if you want to know what that is, I'll tell you the story about some Swiftboat guys that served with him and his phony Purple Hearts. Anyway, I'm unscathed. Thank you. I'm unscathed, and so I've still got a long ways to go. But for the first and only time in my life, I felt panic. I had this gripping feeling in my chest, panic that I had to get out of that seat or I'd ride it into the ground, because what went through my mind was that fireball that I fell through, would have burned away that drogue chute. And that drogue chute is what activates the sequence of events once you get down to the lower altitude, and the barostat tells the guillotines to fire and parachute extraction and all that. You could be unconscious and you wouldn't have to do anything till you hit the ground. I guess they still teach you that. Well, I had this feeling, if I don't get out of this thing, I'm going to ride it into the ground. So against all my training, I pulled the guillotine handles, squeezed the triggers, pushed away from the seat, and I just couldn't wait to see the nylon over my head. I grabbed the D-ring and pulled it, and what a mistake, because I was still at too high an altitude, and the opening shock was just amazing. I mean, it sounded like an explosion, bam! And it was strong enough that 2 of the parachute panels ripped out. Anyway, I've got a good chute, and I've got a ways to go on. I'm looking down there, there's an undercast, and I'm looking around, and to my relief, here's Mike Lane and his chute coming down above me. He let the automatic sequence work, so I was down quite a bit lower by the time I saw him. Well, I'm about to enter the cloud deck, and it was a wonderful, beautiful experience. It was like a sea of cotton candy, very serene, and one of the most beautiful things. And if I wasn't in such a nervous condition, I would have enjoyed it. Well, I break through the cloud deck, and I look down, and it's the third offset. I look down there, and there's no jungle. And most of my missions over Vietnam was over jungle. And there's no jungle. There's just rice paddies and little hamlets and villages. So that was really a sinking feeling, no pun intended, as I'm coming down. Well, I could see I was going to land in a rice paddy near a little fish pond, and I hit the ground, and of quickly got out of my parachute, and I looked around, and here I could see these peasants, these farmers running across the rice paddy. Two of them had AKs, and they were going like this and yelling and jabbering and carrying on. Now, I had just seen the movie Bridges of Toko-Ri a couple of weeks before. Most of you are too young to remember that movie, but if you have seen it, you remember at the end, Bill Holden, fighter pilot, is shot down, and he's in a rice paddy, and here's these Koreans running across, yelling and carrying on, and he decided to shoot it out, be a hero. So he pulls out his service revolver and bang, 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 shoots at him. Well, there's a lot more of them than there were rounds in his pistol, so they shot him, and the screen went black, and that's to tell you that he got killed. And I remember in a flash thinking, he went thinking about that scene, closing scene, and here I'm repeating it with these farmers running across the field. And I thought, you know, Holden went home to his mansion in Beverly Hills that night, and I'm not going to be in any kind of a mansion. So I did a very heroic thing. I took my service revolver and I threw it as far as I could, stood up and put up my hands while they were on me in a flash. And all they did was march us off to their village. My backseater showed up a few minutes later, and they marched us to their village together, to the schoolhouse where they held us. It was interesting. They didn't really do anything to us except just hold us. And everybody in the village apparently wanted to look at us, and they marched by and gawked at us. I found out years later when I went back there to visit, thank them for not killing me. I asked them, you know, why it took so long for the Army to come and pick us up. And they said, well, you were the first American we've ever seen. And we didn't have a telephone in our village at that time. So one of our young men had to get on a bicycle and bike into the nearest village that had a phone and notify the Army. So they came and picked us up, blindfolded us, stripped us our jockey shorts, tied our hands behind us, and threw us in the back of a truck. And once inside the truck, they pushed us onto a bench and tied our arms behind us. Off we went to Hanoi, stopping at every village along the way where they put us on display. Well, there's others that have more exciting stories about their trip to Hanoi than mine, but that's how my saga began, and the rest is history. And now we'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Colonel Cordier. So our next speaker is Dr. Hector Acosta, Lieutenant Colonel, United States Air Force, retired. Colonel Acosta was an RF-4C Phantom Weapons Systems officer with 92 combat missions over North Vietnam before being shot down on 9 December 1972 by a surface-to-air missile. 30 hours after ejection, he was captured and remained a prisoner of war for 111 days until his release on 1 April 1973. Following 27 years in tactical reconnaissance, aircrew training, curriculum, selection, and classification, Colonel Acosta retired from the Air Force. He then completed a doctoral research and began working as a research scientist in human visual performance and laser eye protection before moving to his current job at Headquarters Air Force Recruiting Service. So please help me in welcoming Colonel Acosta.
Taller people. I want to start this, first of all, by dedicating this to my front seater. His name was Billy Joe Williams. He was a major at the time, posthumously became a lieutenant colonel, and he's on the wall there in the quadrangle one near the Capitol. Also, I'd like to say this with all sincerity, in the parlance of former POWs, as a friggin' new guy. that I am absolutely honored to be in the presence of these friggin' old guys. There's a little irony there as you look at, how many years I've got under my belt. And also, I'd like to sort of say a shout out to all the active duty, young active duty people who are now standing in that thin blue line in our stead. You're my heroes. They're my heroes. And I'm very proud of every one of you. Finally, a shout out to every lieutenant in the universe. I was one when all this happened, and I did some pretty stupid things, managed to survive it. And so that we'll see that interwoven throughout this story, I hope. Somehow not mess that up. Okay, first slide. So we'll start that. Yeah, you know about that. That's where we work. Okay, that's the double ugly. Only this is the pretty version. It's the RF4. Okay, sleek. It flies faster generally because it doesn't have all that junk hanging off of it. But we can't hurt anybody with that airplane. Okay, and it's not called the double ugly because of the airplane. It's because of the guys inside. Okay. All right, and here I am with the jet and RTU. This is at Shaw, long, long ago, far, far away. And the ugly one is me. Okay, this is me with my squadron. I'm the backseater there with the arrow. I kind of took that to heart. This was in early August of 1972. In this picture, what I've got is, oh, that's a weak one. You're right, I should have started with this one. Okay, there are 5 people in this picture who were shot down. 2 of them ended up killed in action. 3 of them ended up POWs, me being one of them. And these 2 bums up here, Jimmy Watts, we called him Mr. Recce. He had over 300 missions in Vietnam. And he flew all the tough ones. Every tough one that came down, they'd give it to Jimmy Watts. And his backseater, who I don't know how he got into the back seat, he was like 8'5", John Pomeroy. They got shot down by AAA, managed to get feet wet and got picked up out of the water by a Jolly. And so they're the recovered pair in this bunch. There's me. This is Bill Gant, another giant. He was a front seater. He got shot down, again, just north of the DMZ. AAA got him, and he survived and became a POW. His backseater, Fran Townsend, right there. Fran got killed trying to evade the enemy on the ground. Right here, we got, Roger Benfeld right there. Roger Benfeld, he got killed on a weather recce, which is way up north, up near the Northeast Railroad, actually doing a weather recce, got taken out by a SAM in weather. His backseater, Tomasito Shigaki, right there, he got picked up and ended up being a POW. So that's the stack in that picture. This was August of '72. It's just a few weeks later that 2 of those crews got shot down. It was the 13th and the 22nd of August when the 13th and 19th of August when they got shot down. And these guys got shot down like 22 September, and my shoot down was December 9th. My front seater, Billy Joe Williams, isn't in the picture. He didn't get to the squadron until a few weeks before the mission that got him shot down. He was probably on his 6th mission. He'd done his orientation rides. He's old recce. I found out from him the night before we flew together. He picked me up at the O Club, grabbed me out of my seat at the O Club and said, "Hey, let's talk." Yes, sir. Old guy, 40, right? Billy Joe. Old. Anyway, he pulls me over and we sat down, and he wanted to explain to me why he didn't want me to rotate the command selector valve, right, on the jet. That's that dual sequence to get ejection that Ken talked about. The backseater could rotate a handle, look like a parking brake thing, and you rotate it, into a detent, move it 90 degrees, and it allowed the backseater to pull the handles. In the dual sequence, the backseater always went first. The front seater pulled the handles, the backseater went, and sometimes that'd be a Yahoo without much warning if the conditions are right. And otherwise, you could rotate the handle, and then the sequence was the same. The backseater would go, you'd go when you pull the handles, and about 0.8 seconds later, the front seater would go, okay? Well, he was there to apologize to me about saying he was going to take up his option in a standard briefing not to rotate the command selector valve. Now, it's true, I hadn't had any pilots do that before in the RF4, but I figured it was in the checklist for a reason. And so I said, sir, you don't have to apologize to me. You just tell me not to rotate it. I won't rotate it. Well, I lied. I ended up rotating it after we got shot. Okay. Okay, next slide. All right, you've heard the talk about the SA-2. One added thing, it's got that warhead thing with the gunpowder, and that's 435 pounds of that stuff. So it's a pretty big, it's a flying bomb, okay? And it goes pretty fast. At full velocity, it's making like about a half a mile a second, which is pretty quick. Twice as fast as a very fast bullet. Anyway, I did get shot down by one of these, and that just, if you didn't get the point, I got shot down by one of these. Okay, that's all of that. And let's see, okay, this is, I think I've covered all of that stuff. Just to tell you about tactical recce, because I'm dealing with a whole bunch of fighter pukes here. We're tactical recce, we were, alone, unarmed, and scared for duty. They called it Unafraid. Robert Stack made a movie about that, some video about that stuff. Anyway, there were 117 recce pukes, aircraft shot down in Vietnam. 38 of them were RF-101 Voodoos. And let's see, 79, I do stats now for recruiting service. I got to give you some numbers. 79 RF-4s, the Voodoos between November of '64 and August of '68 when they left country and got rotated, basically draw down. And then the RF-4 from April of '68, a little overlap, till December '72. Ours was the last tactical reconnaissance aircraft to get shot down in combat ever. What a distinction, right? One more did get shot down, but that was by the Navy over the Med. No further comment necessary. Okay, all right. So our frag that day was basically fly medium altitude out just north of the DMZ, fly LOC, a low level. We dropped down to low level. We were escorted by 4 slatted E's that burned a lot of gas and could turn a lot better than we could. They shackled above us basically, and we dropped down low level, did that LOC, popped out, feet wet, headed north. Notice that shaky line, that's because I'm kind of a shaky flyer. And we drove up there. About here, we finished our fuel checks. We had Blue 4 calling us tap and burner just about the whole way up. And so we kept backing it off. And then we accelerated to about 585, started to turn inbound after we had climbed a couple of thousand feet, because north of our line, this frag had been attempted 5 days in a row by recce, and on this day, the weather was just enough so we could get the target. This was a mapping calibration thing for the Loran-D, which is the most precise kind of positioning system we had in that day. About 8 meters when it was calibrated. Pretty good accuracy. We did these calibration runs. Our medium altitude camera would take pictures, and every picture had a printout of the assumed position based on Loran-D. And then the PIs would go in and make their little checks to see what dead center on that photo was against what it actually was, and they'd calibrate the thing. So it was an important kind of mission. We didn't know it, but it was in preparation. Well, they didn't think we knew it, but it was in preparation for the buffs coming to Hanoi on the 18th. So this is the 9th of December. That day, the intel officer, with great enthusiasm, said, "Don't tell anybody." He was telling everybody who came to the window, but the buffs are going to Hanoi and it's on the 18th, and holy cow, and all of us were, yeah, so intel officers. Okay, so we go feet dry, made a hotspot call when I thought we were inside these threat rings. We got a couple of SAMs that straddled the line we were flying. It was the 1915th parallel. Okay, so we fly, due west up that puppy. We're supposed to get about 80 miles of that done and in the can in order to call it a counter. And I thought we could get it. So we climbed that extra couple of thousand feet because one of those SAM sites was under the clouds, give us a little more reaction time. And so at about 14,000 feet, 585 knots ground speed, we coasted in. And about maybe 40 seconds later, after the hotspot call, we got a call from one of my wingmen who was shackling above us, and he tells us we got a SAM coming off the ground, 10 o'clock low. And you've heard a bit about the SAM. It's a nasty little piece of work. Since we saw it coming off the ground, we didn't change our speed or our direction or anything. It was right there at 10 o'clock. So as soon as we were sure it was tracking on us, then we started to maneuver. Basically, it put us in good position to do that. We do the little dance, you turn hard into it, and then you do it out of plane when you think it's about all the time you got, and try and generate a miss. So Billy Joe took it after I made sure he had a padlock on it. I was looking for other things. By the time we recovered, I'd seen 2 more SAMs in the air. They were no factor, but my raw gear was saying we got something coming at 12 o'clock low, and it's coming hard because the raw gear was just dancing off the wall. We didn't have very fancy raw gear. It was analog, and it just basically told you the direction and the kind of threat signals that were being broadcast. So that's all we knew. So I hollered to Billy Joe. I said, we got something coming, roll me hard. I want to try and see if I can see something 12 o'clock. And so he starts to roll the aircraft hard. While I'm looking, I ran out of time. Boom, right above, just above waterline at about 11:30. A big explosion, couldn't have been more than 100 feet away, just a gigantic, white wall. Got slammed back in my seat. Airplane got peppered really good. We were in perfect kill spot for the damn SA-2. And of course, it's always the one that you don't see that you can't avoid, so we didn't. And it ripped us up. It took me, first thing automatic was go for that command selector valve, because that was dancing in my head the whole time. I never realized it, but I was always thinking about it. And usually one of the briefing items was pilots often didn't want it rotated all the time. They just wanted for takeoff, landing, and when you go into a threat zone. And so I was doing it for none of those. And so it was still in my head. So the first thing that happened when my cockpit started turning all orange from the JP4, by the way, the F4 has a big feeder tank that runs along the spine. And when we took the hit, it ripped the firewall behind me. And so JP4 was everywhere, and I was literally soaked in it. And everything turned into a big orange fireball. And reached forward. Luckily, I couldn't see it, but I got that handle on the first try, rotated it, and then went for the handles. And my right arm didn't cooperate. There was something wrong with the damn thing. And took me 3 tries to finally get that second hand up there. I had to readjust which muscles I used to get the hand on the handle. If not, I was going to pull with one hand, and you could do that. Finally got that second handle on there, and by the time I was going up the rail, I was screaming like a banshee because the heat and pressure were just really something. Okay. Most beautiful sound to this day on Earth is whoop. That's when the slipstream blows the fire out. Okay, and so I'm coming down. I'm smoking like something in a cartoon. Okay, there's smoke coming off me like crazy, and they don't have to teach you in training about reaching for the risers, check your risers, or your canopy. You do that automatically. Your feet are hanging out there and nothing. First thing you do is go whoop. And when I tried to do that, I went well, that didn't work. And of course, you look up to check the canopy, and I had 4 panels blown out. And that could have been from opening shock or shrapnel coming through the top of the seat, because that's where the parachute was sat in the Martin Baker systems, one that Ken had, but a later model. Let's see, who's got that timing clock? I have no idea how long I've been talking. All right. All right, so I'm shot down. I'm coming down on the chute. During the coming down the chute, I had time to get out my radio, try and call my front seater, saw him. I passed him up. Coming down, because I was kind of doing this little dance. There he is. There he is. It's one of those. And like a fool, I'm trying to call him on the radio, but I recall later, as I played back this whole thing, that the man was hanging in his harness with his head down. The reason he hadn't ejected us is because he was in front of me, and that big old bomb went off a good 8 feet closer to him than me, and I think that can make all the difference in the world when you got an expanding ring of stuff. And I took hits, and I'm sure he did too. But we got him out of the airplane, and later we found out that the North Vietnamese reported that 2 pilots had been shot down. They didn't understand about WIZOs or pilots. They called everybody pilots. And they said 2 pilots had been shot down. 1 had been captured, and 1 had been too badly wounded to be transported. So they claimed euthanasia. They claimed that they killed him because he was too badly hurt to be. Okay, I've got 10 more minutes. Oh man, I got a lot of time. All right. Coming down, the big surprise for me, there's a few oh shit moments like Ken described, was that I was coming down in trees. I thought I was gonna have to figure out how to E&E behind little rice paddy things, yeah? No, I was coming down in trees, so I had to get ready for that, hit the trees, boom, 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 boom. I was gonna do the world's best PLF, but the trees hung me up, my toes touched the ground. The hill was going that way, bad guys were coming, there was pop, 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 the AK-47. I say, I can't stay here. I did the coke release thing because I was all ready for that. Had this hand, I put it up there, got the coke releases, released from that, fell down, picked up my helmet, threw it with my left hand, and it went a long way up the hill. Took that seat pack I had, popped it off, swung it, and adrenaline's a wonderful thing. That thing weighed about 15 pounds or something, and the last time I saw it, it was still climbing. And I turned around, and like an F4, you unload, you know? I was booking down that hill as fast as I could go. Bad guys, like I said, I could hear individual voices and the guns going, and I ran. And I used to run the perimeter every other day. So, you know, running, I didn't even notice the running. But I had a flashback just as I turned to head south on that hill. I'm going for all I'm worth. Flashback of an instructor, crusty instructor in jungle survival training. And he said, look at the guy next to you. He's likely to get shot down. You know, you might make a poor guy. You know, I always look at the guy next to you and say, poor guy. And he said, if and when you get shot down, you're going to react. If you're alive, you're going to react. And if you survive that, then you got to do the one thing that has a chance of keeping you alive. You got to think. So, wherever you are, whatever's going on, you find yourself a nice flat rock. You sit your butt down on it. You take out your canteen or anything you got, take a long, cool drink, and you start to think, or you will not survive. So I'm running like a banshee down that hill, and I'm looking for a flat rock. Oh well. About 40 minutes later, I found the kind of country I was looking for because I managed to avoid the little native guys in the Philippines when we did the jungle training. And I avoided them by going into the nastiest, ugliest, uphill, grungy country I could find and dropping my butt down into it real hard. So I ran until I found a place that looked like, man, I can't climb into that. I climbed into it. So I found myself a good place to hide, but it turns out that part of the country was just loaded with these little villages. And this was the only high ground for miles. But the fun. So I climb up that hill, I go through all the grungy stuff. I could have found a trail about 10 feet over there and another one over there and another one over there. There were 5 villages ringing this damn hill. And guess what they had up there? They had AAA at one end of it and AAA at the other end of it. So this was not a good place to go park my butt, right? But I did. Found myself a good place to hide, got into it. Later found out a trail ran right next to my position. I took stock of what I had on me. You know, I had my little med box, which was useless. I had 2 radios, which was good, and they were not damaged. I had 2 flares. Both of them had been hit by shrapnel and dented and bent, and they hadn't cooked off. Pyrotechnic, and they hadn't cooked off. I buried them and dug a hole and buried them. Found a compass, made a little compass road, so I knew which way was north, south, east, and west, which is handy. Anyway, in the end, I burned, so on my hands, I found a hole in my chest. I thought, oh man, you know, and then I tried to make bubbles come out. Nothing came out, so I figured I'm okay and stopped looking at it. You know, I had burns on my face and arms and stuff, but I didn't feel too bad, except I felt a bit dehydrated. I drank all my water as fast as I could because they had advised us to do that. You got to hydrate as soon as you can. Anyway, 2 SARS, 5 minutes. Okay. 2 SARs. The first SAR I had to call off because the bad guys, enemy close. Remember that I had a trail right around me. I had 2 guys right here, and I had a whole bunch of people who had stopped to look at the helicopters. It was like, you know, oh, wow, tourist day. But all of them had AKs, and it wasn't a good place to bring anybody. So I called off the first SAR. Second SAR, our helicopters set up in exactly the same place. And when the on-scene commander got the stick from the Sandys, who had earlier done a strafing pass to get bad guys off my hill, he said, "Lieutenant," I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "When I say pop your flare, I want you to pop your flare." "Yes, sir." He says, "I don't care if there's a bad guy standing on your chest." "Yes, sir." So, and he said, "Pop your flare," just like that. So I dropped my radio, I popped the flare. Now the flare didn't go, tss, you know, when you pop it. It went, oh man. 2 bad guys happened to be almost 3 bad guys happened to be on the trail, just 8 feet from me. Their pit helmets are right down there. And this was not a way to stay quiet. And out of all the thundering noise, the helicopters, F4s dropping crap on the villages, all that stuff going on, they could hear that little snap from that darn thing. And they turned, and it's like their eyes got big and my eyes got bigger, and they started firing their AKs at me. Now they're doing it like this. They're firing their AKs over the top of this because I'm up there. And they're firing like that. And man, there's bullets flying all over the place. And it's just like a John Wayne movie, okay? So I'm diving for the ground as fast as I can go. And I swear it took 2 days to go from here to there. And all I did was jump, you know? But it's like, stuff is going. I'm watching grass go, you know, I'm watching leaves and twigs flying. I'm watching the dirt where I'm about to land get all chewed up. And here I come, boom, I hit the ground. I'm not dead. It's amazing. Okay, my radio, where is it? Of course, it's right about there. So I'm down and stuff is hitting, it's hitting hard enough to hurt. And I reach up to grab that radio and something slams me up the side of the head and just, I saw stars. I mean, it's like, you know, felt like a really big guy had hit me really hard. I'm out of time, right? Okay, close. I'll do this quick. In the end, I didn't die. The guy came around, they jabbed a gun in my ribs. They took me down. 3 guys took me down. They ended up meeting with a bunch of other irregulars. I'm down to my tighty whities, and you know, they tied my wrists together and blindfolded me. I did some stupid screaming to make them give me a cigarette, and that almost got me killed twice. Then we finally go to a village. I get initial medical treatment. They cut off all the hanging skin. My burns weren't anywhere near as bad as Joe's. He's going to talk about his, so I was lucky. Let's see. I didn't go anywhere near what's on this chart. First interrogation, I'll do that. They got me to a village. I did my first interrogation. They take me out from where they had just finished doing the medical stuff, and they sit me down on a little stool that they had obviously just cut the legs off of. So it was down, stool down like that. They sit me down on that. I got a guard here and a guard here, both of them holding their guns at port. And in front of me, there's a young, very, very junior North Vietnamese officer in his best uniform, I swear it had to be. He's at a little table. He's got a book, clearly a dictionary, and a pad and a pencil, and he was gonna just pump me for information out the gazoo and get a gold star or something. And he asked me first question, name, and so I give him my name. Serial number, I gave him a serial number. He goes, "You Lao?" Now remember, they had, part of the thing is they had cut off the top of my flight suit because of the wounds and burns and stuff. And so I'm bare chested, but I've got my flight suit from here down, right? And I go, "What? Lao?" You know? And he goes, "Lao." And he points to my skin, you know, his skin. And I go, "Oh crap, I'm brown." Let's see. How do I explain Mexican to this guy? So I said, I'll take the direct approach. Mexican. Well, first I said, no, Yankee air pirate. Because that's what they said on the radio all the time. Yankee air pirate. He goes, no. I go, Mexican. Okay. So then he goes to his book. Oh, To this day, I think his good news to the people of Hanoi was that Mexico had gone to war with Vietnam. All right, that's enough of that.
Awesome. Thank you, Colonel Acosta. And for our third speaker before our break is Colonel Norman E. Wells, United States Air Force retired. Colonel Wells was an F-4 Phantom pilot. His combat experience as a member of the 555th Tactical Fighter Squadron included 2 MiG kills and helping to lead the first attack on North Vietnamese airfields. Colonel Wells later served as the Joint Program Director for JTIDS, known as now Link 16. It's a communication system responsible for providing situational awareness for air crews across multiple major weapon systems. After retiring from the Air Force, Colonel Wells worked 21 years at Lockheed Martin, developing advanced air defense missile systems. Retiring from Lockheed in 2004, he became a part-time consultant in the defense industry. So please help me in welcoming Colonel Wells.
Well, thank you. I'm really honored to be on the platform with these guys who got shot down and went through hell. I did not get shot down. There's another Norm Wells that did. And my tour was a lot less shorter and less demanding than his. So I get to talk about several missions that went really well, and the MiGs ended up burning at the end of our missions. So I flew F-4s out of U-Bahn, as it says here. At the time, we had pilots in the back seat, so I was a pilot. We were officially weapon systems officers, or finally called the GIB, or the guy in back, or the tail gunner. So I'm going to start with background a little bit, and then talk about the events leading up to Operation Bolo, and then a weather recce that we flew right after Bolo, and then talk about the first attack in North Vietnamese airfields, and then a couple of MiG sweeps, and end with some statistics. So these are the players. Let me get set up here just a second. All right, so upper left is our wing commander, Colonel Robin Olds. So that's not going to work. So let me find a way where I can make this work. So Colonel Olds was our wing commander, great combat leader, had gotten 12 kills in Europe in World War II, and came to U-Bahn and straightened out the wing, and we were pretty effective. So this picture was taken on the 4th of May, 1967, after his second kill. On his right is his backseater, Bill Lefevre, and on his right is then Major Bill Kirk, who later retired as a 4-star general. Thank you, safety. Right under him is First Lieutenant Randy Turk, his backseater, and then in the middle on the bottom is then Captain, later Major General Dick Pascoe, my front seater. Dick and I flew together for about 2 years, and we started at RTU together at Davis-Monthan, 40th Squadron at Eglin, Wild Weasel training at Nellis, and then flew a tour at U-Bahn. Great aviator and knew how to fly air to air. And then I'm on the bottom. So this is the airplane, literally the airplane from the mission on the 6th of June that I'll talk about. That's the artist's conception of how I viewed the picture. That's a MiG-17 who's actually burning a lot more than that, and you'll see him crash here in a few slides. So we carried, you see, semi-submerged 4 AIM-7 Sparrow missiles, radar guided, about an 85-pound warhead. On the inboard stations, we carried AIM-7 Sidewinders, and that's about a 25-pound warhead infrared missile. On the right outboard, there's a QRC 160 jamming pod, which we started using in Operation Bolo and was somewhat effective and much more effective when we got into a pod formation, which allowed us to fly together and keep the SAMs off us pretty well. Note the airplane does not have a gun, which was a great deficiency. So this is the cockpit of the F-4C. You can just see a little bit of the sight. It was a combining glass. You dialed in the mills. It did not have a lead computing sight, and it was just a circle, a ring with a pipper in the middle that you dialed. So a little bit over here is the radar warning receiver display. We'll get the picture of that up in the back seat in just a minute. That's the radar. And so from the seat here, you can see what I'm seeing, and he gets steering information for shooting the spare. Other than that, it's pretty Stone Age cockpit compared to what you guys fly now. So here's the back seat. Here's the radar warning receiver. So we would have a strobe that would point in the direction of the radar, and the length of the strobe would tell you signal strength. So 2.5 rings would be enough for them to have enough signal to kill you. That's the billboard that would have little lights that would light up and tell you who's shooting at you. There was a launch light in there that lit up when they turned the launch signal on from the SA-2. And you also had audio that would tell you get a loud tone that was AAA and sounded like a rattlesnake if a SA-2 was on you. That's my radar scope. And what's not shown is the stick and rudders, so I could fly the airplane from the back seat. We had an inertial navigation system, which sort of worked. If you followed the needles, you'd get lost. So you needed to be real careful how you used it. But we found MiGs by Mark I eyeball in the radar. And the radar had a little blip that was the target if you tuned it right, and then you could get range and bearing and overtake. So typical strike force going into the Hanoi area was flights of 4 and would be somewhere around 4 to 8 flights carrying bombs, some MiG-cap, some wild weasels doing defense suppression, and then a whole lot of supporting airplanes. So it wasn't just the strike force that went in, it needed the entire group to be able to conduct the mission. Tankers were essential if you're going to Hanoi. At least we need to refuel on the way in and sometimes on the way out. We had the rescue folks that would come and get you if you landed south of the Red River. At least they would try. We had an airborne radar airplane, kind of like an AWACS, that would give you some information and helped us on one of our missions. Navy also had a radar on their cruiser, and then we had the B-66 jammer that was somewhat effective in dropping chaff and jamming, and lots of intelligence assets that were out there that we didn't know anything about, getting information. So this is the order of battle in Hanoi. During that time period, the order of battle changed. So you see the ring around Hanoi, Haiphong, Chinese border. The blue line is the SAM ring. So if you were inside the blue line, the SAMs would get you, could get you. The gray is where they had 37, 57, 85, and 100 millimeter guns. So every place you went, they had lots of guns. And then the purple is the 37, 57 millimeter guns. And machine guns everywhere. So during this time period, there were about 8,000 AAA guns in North Vietnam. So basically everywhere you went, they shot at you. Except right there, you see there are no guns. That's Stud Ridge. And so they couldn't put guns on that ridge, and so that's the way we went into Hanoi. For those of us based in Thailand, we would take off and hit the air refueling tracks over Laos, go to Tak An Channel 97, and then inbound to the bend in the river here by Yen Bay, down Thud Ridge to Hanoi. The EB-66 and the 121 would be off to the flanks and providing support. So we air refueled on the way in. As I said, this is a picture with carrying bombs, typically on the F4, 750-pound bombs. You see on the left outboard is a 370-gallon tank, and you don't see the 600-gallon tank on the center line or the jammer on the right outboard. So when I got there in December 1966, we were going to Hanoi in-trail, 5 minutes apart on TOT. So you'd have a flight of 105s, a couple of flights, a Wild Weasel up front, and then flights carrying bombs, and then mid-cap, and then flights, several flights of 105s carrying bombs, and then again mid-cap at the back. So we went in trail where the gunners could track each airplane in turn when you rolled in and shoot at you, and then have time to cool the gun tubes before the next flight of 4 came. During this period, the MiGs were not especially effective. They got 2 kills on 105s, but the 105s were having to jettison their bombs because the MiGs were attacking and they needed to get rid of the bombs to be able to maneuver. So something needed to be done so we could get bombs on target. Colonel Olds came up with an idea, Operation Bolo, which some of you have heard about. And it was that we're going to replace the F-105s carrying bombs with F-4s that fly a formation and look and sound like 105s and be set up for air-to-air. So 5 minutes apart, we were going to be going to be there for 55 minutes and cover their airfields and either shoot them down, run them out of gas, and make them bail out. So the first flights going in were missiles free. Typically, we had to visually identify a target before you could shoot it. But the first flights, if you saw it, you could shoot it because there are no other friendlies in North Vietnam at the time. We used the QRC-160 jamming pod on the F-4s for the first time, so we'd look like thuds. And we had a ground school to learn about the missiles, refresh your memory on the missiles, the jammer, and then I got to teach the APR 25-26 radar homing and warning block because I'd been weasel trained. So as planned, we're going to have 7 flights of 4 F-4s coming out of Yubon, 7 more coming out of Da Nang, coming in from the east, 6 flights of 105 Wild Weasels, and then all the supporting airplanes, including F-104s out of Udorn flying 104s, and they were part of the 435th TAC Fighter Squadron on the 8th Wing. So the 435th did participate in Operation Bolo. As it turned out that day, the weather was bad, low overcast. We had tried to go the day before and couldn't make it, and so we ended up going on the second, low overcast, which kept us from seeing what the MiGs were doing on the ground. Only the first 3 flights out of Yubon got engaged, the other 4 did not, and Da Nang's weather was so bad that they couldn't even get engaged, and they didn't go in. So we got 7 kills that day, no losses. The MiGs responded by chasing the morning weather reconnaissance airplane out for the next 2 days. And so I'm not sure whose idea it is, probably Colonel Olds said, well, let's put up 2 F-4s in close formation so we look like 1 airplane on the radar, and we'll go fly the weather recce route and see if we can get the MiGs up. So we did that on the 5th of January, and nothing happened. 6th of January, Dick Pascoe and I were going to lead the second mid-cap. It was weather canceled, and Colonel Olds said, okay, let's try the weather recce again. And the whole strike force had been canceled, so we were going to be the only ones in North Vietnam. We had missiles free, and we were going to fly the route. So after refueling, we come in here across the red, go north of Thud Ridge, and coming in, we had gotten 2 MiG calls, so we knew the MiGs were up. And part of the task was to find out the the base of the clouds, and we went through the clouds coming down the Northeast Railroad. The base of the clouds are 4,500 feet. We got down to 3,500 feet. Dick said, hey, let's go to Fukien. That's where the MiGs are. And so we went to Fukien. There weren't any MiGs there, but we went across Fukien at 3,500 feet. As we did that, as we got close, the radar warning receiver was just going wild. The entire center of the scope was white. These are strobes that are overlapping. And so all the AAA in North Vietnam is looking at us. But they hadn't shot at us until we got to Hanoi. And then, or I'm sorry, they didn't shoot at us until we got to Fukien, and then they opened up. And it's kind of like like you see in a 4th of July celebration, at that last 30 seconds, that's what it was until we climbed back above the clouds and headed home. And then we got a call from our friendly radar warning airplane, I'm sorry, the radar airplane. MiGs they told us we had a code, so we knew about where they were. We made a 180, and I got 4 contacts at 22 miles, 11 o'clock. So we're now closing and set up for a head-on attack on 4 probably MiGs, because there's no one of the friendlies up there. And at 12 miles, the MiGs turned around and started going the other way. I'm sure that GCI is telling them that they're getting run down from the rear. They made a turn again, and at 5 miles, we're now head on. So we fired a Sparrow, and our wingman, then Major Tom Hirsch, fired, and both missiles missed. We fired again, second missile hit the target, and so the lead airplane burst into flames, flipped, and did an inverted spin, and he went into the clouds. We started after 2, and he went into the clouds, and by now 3 and 4 MiGs have got on us. Tom Hirsch has gotten thrown out of the fight somewhere in here. Dick outmaneuvered them, and we chased number 3 and 4 for a while. He fired 3 sidewinders, and the problem with the sidewinder, if you were within about 3,000 feet, it would not guide because it didn't have time, and that's where we were. Number 3 rolled off and went back in the clouds. Tom Hirsch is back in position, and he fires a Sparrow at this guy, and he's now going up. And I don't think we hit him. I think he flamed out, but anyway, the next time I saw him, he was going down really slow, straight down, and Dick says he bailed out. And the rescue guys now hear this, and they start setting up to recover this MiG pilot, and we told them that wasn't a good idea. And so we came home, did a victory pass. Colonel Olds came out to congratulate us. So this is now January 6th, and notice he does not have a mustache. So after that, you go to the club and wear your hat, ring the bell by the bar, go to the NCO club, ring the bell by the bar, go to the Airmen's Club, ring the bell by the bar. Which is really important because the maintenance folks don't get a lot of attention or the glory, and it was important to keep them in the game. So now airfield attack. President Johnson's administration said we could not attack their airfields, the Chinese might get in the war. And so we did not. On the 22nd of April, 1967, President Johnson signed a directive, and the next morning, our time, I think it was, General Momeyer, commander of 7th Air Force, was at Ubon, took a phone call, came out and said, we're going to attack Wallach Airfield that afternoon. So Wallach is right there, Hanoi is right here. And so the plan was we were going to come through the mountains, low altitude, and attack. So we were set up, the airplanes were set up for 750-pound bombs, and the maintenance folks had to reconfigure 10 airplanes, 4 A's and 2 spares, and we also had 4 mid-cap. So they did a great job of setting this up where we can go do this. Colonel Olds, of course, is leading. Colonel Olds led 4 of these 5 missions that I'm talking about. Anything that was difficult or new, he would be leading. So I'm in his back seat. We had to abort for maintenance. Tom Hirsch took the flight, and we rendezvoused with the flight over Laos, took the lead, and came in through the mountains at low altitude, and we surprised them. They didn't start shooting until we were in the roll-in. We dropped CBUs, cluster bombs, little bomblets. They had a bunch of MiG-17s, revetments at the end of the runway, and we set them on fire. Post-strike photography said we got 9 for sure and 3 probables. So this was the first time we had been allowed to hit their airfields or their airplanes. We actually could not hit the airfield, we could hit the airplanes. Such were the rules that we fought by. So let's talk about some MiG caps. That picture I showed earlier of the 6 of us, this is that mission. So Colonel Olds is leading the 2nd MiG cap. We're number 2, and we come down Third Ridge right here on our way to target in the Hanoi area. On the way in, I get to contact 2 airplanes at about 20 miles, again at about 11 o'clock, and they're head on and they're coming toward us. Called them out. Colonel Olds didn't see them until the 2 MiG-21s flying fighting wing, just like that, rolled out in front of him. He locked up and fired 3 Sparrows at him, and then 2 Sidewinders. And one of the Sidewinders hit, and Major Kirk got to watch the burning MiG land on a AAA site in Fukien. So the 105s that we were escorting now have departed. When a 105 comes off target, it pushes up to at least 600 knots and outruns everything, including us. And so Colonel Olds said, let's see what else is up. So we left Fukien area and we came over to Wallach, where we had been a couple of weeks before, and found 5 MiG-17s in the traffic pattern. And chased those for a while until he ran out of missiles, and then he gave the lead to us, and we started chasing the MiGs. Number 4 calls bingo -4. So he's saying 4,000 pounds before 4,000 pounds below the fuel I need to get home. And F4 burns at high altitude. You burn about 100 pounds a minute, and the gauge is accurate to 350 pounds. So he jettisoned everything. Colonel Olds convinced the tanker to come way north, and he got on the tanker with 200 pounds. And tanker saved him. So we came back home. He was pretty happy. Little champagne with Bill Lefevre, and he's got a mustache there. Month later, it's the same thing. Colonel Olds is leading the 2nd MiG cap, or number 2. This is a little bit different in that now we've got F4Ds that have come over, and the F4D, instead of the Sidewinder, the D carries the AIM-4 Falcon. It started off as an air defense missile, and it has a whole big 4-pound warhead, no prox fuse, contact only. It's shooting the flares off the drones at Eglin, and the 40th Squadron says these things are great, they're going to kill all the MiGs in North Vietnam. So lead and trio carrying him on both of our 2 MiG caps. So we go in with chasing the thuds, they hit the target, and we leave, and on the way out, there is an engagement. There's actually 2 engagements. Our other MiG cap is engaged, and a flight from Da Nang is engaged with a bunch of MiG-17s. So we get in the middle of that, and Colonel Olds shoots 4 Sparrows and 2 Falcons. And the other 2, the AIM-4s, did not fire, so he's out of missiles. Gave the lead to us, and we saw a MiG at 7 o'clock at low altitude, sliced back, and I found him on the radar. So we're now at 900 feet and chased him, and basically looking up his tailpipe. And as we're closing on him, we can't identify who it is because the MiG-17 is pretty small looking up the rear. About the time Dick Pascoe sees that it's a MiG, he shoots, and Colonel Olds says, well, shoot him, Pascoe. And the missile hit the target, hit the MiG, and Dick says, I just did. Fired another missile which hit him, and I did again. And that's the MiG. That's the airplane. We flew back, painted a star. So in Southeast Asia, the Air Force got 137 kills. The triple nickel got 39. The 8th Wing got 38 and a half. Bob Hope called us the world's largest distributor of MiG parts. You see, during the first 6 months of 1967, the kill ratio was really good, and then the MiGs changed tactics, and things didn't get so good. The Sparrow got most of the kills, but you see only 10% of the missiles hit their target. But as you'll hear from Joe, sometimes you shoot to make the MiG stop doing what he's doing. You shoot out of limits, and you just want something to happen, but the Sparrow was not especially good. Sidewinder got fewer kills, but it had a higher percentage. The Falcon didn't do very well. The gun did really well and was responsible for 40 kills. I point out that by now, the 435th Tactical Fighter Squadron is flying F-4Ds at UBON and got 6.5 kills. So that's a summary of what I did in those 5 missions. Bolo got 7 kills. The Weather Recce got 2. We got at least 9 kills, maybe 12 on the in the attack on the airfield, and then we got a couple of kills on the MiG. And that's my story. So I'll take you.
Thank you, Colonel Wells. All right, folks, so we're going to take a 15-minute break, stand up and stretch. So we will resume promptly at 14:30. 14:30 we'll start. Thank you.
Extend out.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll get started as soon as we all get back in our seats. And our cell phones, smartphones will go back to silent, please. All right, if we could get our phones back on silent, we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, our next speaker is Dr. Joseph Milligan, Colonel, United States Air Force retired. A forward air controller, air commando, and one of the original 12 F-4 Wild Weasel pilots. Colonel Milligan has combat time in the F-4, the O-1F, and the T-28. Colonel Milligan was shot down on his 113th combat mission on 20 May 1967 and spent nearly 6 years as a POW. His numerous combat decorations include the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit, 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses with Valor, and the Bronze Star with Valor. His distinguished service following repatriation includes earning a PhD in nutrition from Rutgers and a doctorate in veterinary medicine from Cornell. Colonel Milligan is currently president and CEO of Environmental Decisions Incorporated and president of POWs, the Association of Vietnam War POWs. So please help me in welcoming Colonel Milligan.
Thank you very much. Well, Colonel Wells told you all the good stories about dog fights and shooting down MiGs and all the fun missions that went right. But you know, they didn't all go that way. If they did, there wouldn't be a POW Symposium today. So I'm going to tell you a few stories that took place the same time frame, flying out of Ubon, Thailand in the first half of 1967. Norm and I had been together for a long time up to that point. We started out in F4 training at Davis-Monthan together. Our first operational assignment at the 40th Attack Fighter Squadron at Eglin Air Force Base together. Then we went through Wild Weasel training at the Fighter Weapons Center together, and finally deployed to Ubon, Thailand, albeit in separate squadrons. He was in the Triple Nickel, I was in the 433rd. Yes, thank you. Well, Operation Bolo went so well, and the fake weather recce a few days later, that it was decided that let's try this again. Not too many people know or remember or even talk about Operation Bolo 2, but there was one on the 23rd of January 1967. It was planned pretty much the same way Colonel Wells explained for Operation Bolo, except we had all the usual support aircraft, but a fewer F4s. We only had 4 flights of F4s, all out of Ubon, Thailand. We had 2 flights from the 497th, the Night Owl Squadron. Although why they were flying these day missions, I don't know to this day, but they usually flew strictly at night. And then we had 2 4-ships from my squadron, the 433rd. The mission commander for that 16-ship gaggle was our wing DO, Colonel Chappie James. A remarkable man, started his career as a Tuskegee Airman and ended his career as the first African-American 4-star general. He was a people person, just a joy to work under. I'm not going to say anything about his flying skills, however. Chappie had flown 101 missions in Korea, including being shot down and rescued on one of those missions, and he had 78 more missions in Southeast Asia. Well, like I say, it went just like Operation Bolo did, except we never saw any MiGs on this mission. This was a plan gone awry. We ran into a solid undercast of clouds at about 3,000 feet above the ground level. And instead of MiGs, we saw way too many SAMs. Of our 4 flights of F4s, we counted a total of 15 SAMs being fired at us. 3 of the 4 ships got shot at by four SAMs each, and 1 flight by 3 SAMs. When a SAM comes up at you, you actually have a chance, and if it's guiding on you, you have a chance to outmaneuver it. And the procedure that we were taught was, when you see it, you turn your aircraft to a 90-degree angle from the flight path of the SAM, and then you wait. and you wait, and you wait. Of course, it's doing Mach 4, so you're not waiting very long, believe me. And just when you think it's about to hit you, you break down hard into it. And at the speed it's going, it doesn't have the ability to follow you. And even if the proximity fuse explodes, that expanding ring of metal that Concordia was talking about goes flying past you instead of hitting you. This is the ultimate in on-the-job training. Okay, you only got one. There were no ground training for this, no simulator training. You did it real time the first time, and if you got it right the first time, then the second time it was a lot easier. Still just as scary, but a lot easier. Unfortunately, in this type of on-the-job training, if you break too soon into that SAM, it has a chance to follow you down. And if you break too late, well, it's too late. But you can outmaneuver these things even if they're tracking you. Well, the good news for us that day was we were carrying the QRC jamming pods, which were very effective. And when our raw gear was just going nuts with 15 SAMs in the air. And when those things came up, though, it became quickly apparent to most of us that they were not guiding on us. The pods were doing their job. And although some of those SAMs came rather close, they weren't getting any closer. And it looked like the North Vietnamese were command detonating those warheads at a specified altitude that they decided upon in case they weren't guiding. Well, part of what went wrong on that mission was the number 4 airplane on one of the 2 Night Owl flights had an inoperative QRC pod. And so the in-flight instructions to them was to stick close to number 3 if we get fired at by SAMs. The 2 pilots in that airplane, Captain Barry Bridger and Lieutenant Dave Gray. I remember I didn't know either one of them because I was flying in a different squadron. I remember in the pre-flight briefing, I was sitting right next to Dave Gray, and we were getting acquainted, and he asked me how many missions that I had flown so far, and I don't remember how that was. That's a long time ago now, but I asked Dave how many flights he had, and this was his 4th combat mission. This was his first day mission in theater. Well, it was Bridger and Gray who had the inoperative pod. They had a SAM that was tracking them, and from what I observed, Barry did not have much time to react to that SAM. In the chaos that ensued as number 4, he got thrown out wide on a turn. I mean, it's like crack the whip out there for number 4 if you're doing any kind of sudden maneuvers. And so he's the one without the pod. He gets flung out wide. He's a sitting duck. He's got the SAM coming up from probably about 4 o'clock position. He knows it, and it looked like he tried to execute a split S and down into that SAM to avoid it. And he had no sooner rolled and inverted and just starting to pull through, and he takes a head on from a second SAM. And there was just this huge fireball explosion. And when the fire cleared, the only thing left was this expanding debris field of little tiny pieces of metal just filtering down through the clouds below. There were no ejection seats. There were no parachutes. there were no beepers. The rules of engagement in those days was that if somebody was killed in combat and you could recover the remains, or in lieu of that, if you could at least recover the dog tags, they were listed as KIA, killed in action. Otherwise, they were listed as missing in action, MIA. In the rare instance that the evidence was so overwhelming that you couldn't recover the remains of the dog tags, but if you were practically 100% sure that they were dead, they would list them as probably killed in action, PKIA, and that was the case with Bridger and Gray. Because we had 15 other crews, 30 pilots that returned to the post-flight debriefing, and we all saw the exact same thing, albeit each from a slightly different angle, but we all saw those two gentlemen killed. So that was not a happy ending. Awful quiet trip back to Ubon that day. We weren't going to see any MiG, so we didn't hang around any longer. Let me switch now to a dogfight. And this, I call this a historic dogfight. It's 20th of May, 67. I got shot down on this dogfight, otherwise I might not be talking about it. It was historic for a number of reasons. First of all, it was a dogfight that lasted about 15 minutes, a little bit less than that for me, but a total dogfight lasted about 15 minutes, and as far as we know, that's still considered the longest dogfight in the history of jet aviation. 15 minutes is a long time to be in and out of burner in an intense operation against somebody that's trying to kill you, and vice versa. Historic also because of some of the people that were involved. Colonel Wells mentioned the typical force that was bombing force or strike force that was going in. Our target that day was the Kep Railroad yards on the Northeast Railroad. It was a main marshalling yard. And we had a larger gaggle of airplanes than was normal. Colonel Wells talked about anywhere from 16 to 32 members of a strike force. Typically, we actually had 2 wings in a combined strike force. We had 32 thuds out of Tockley and another 32 thuds out of Karat, plus 8 F-4s out of the 433rd at Ubon flying MiG-cap. There were 8 Wild Weasel airplanes, and all the rest of the, you add those up, I think that comes to 80, and you add up all the rest of the support aircraft involved. I remember in the pre-flight briefing, the number 100 aircraft total being involved in this entire mission. So it's an awful big gaggle. The two flights of F-4s, one was Tampa flight. That's the flight I was in. Our flight lead was our wing commander, Robin Olds, who you've heard about his history. He was a triple ace, including World War II and Vietnam, 16 kills. His backseat pilot was Lieutenant Steve Croker, went on to retire as a 3-star and was a member of the board of directors at USAA here in San Antonio for a long time. Steve had 2 MiG kills. The gentleman on the left is Jack Van Loan. He was my aircraft commander, or as we backseaters like to call him, he was my nose. I was the pilot. He was my nose gunner. Excuse me, my nose gunner. That's me on the right. Our number 3 airplane were Bob Pardo and Steve Wayne. Bob Pardo had 1 MiG kill, 1 confirmed 1 MiG kill, I should say, in Vietnam. and his backseat pilot, Steve Wayne, had 2 MiG kills. And those 2 gentlemen are famous for something other than just their MiG kills. Many of you here may have heard of the Pardo push. If you haven't heard about it, I'm not going to take time to explain it, but Google it. There's plenty on the internet about that mission. But basically, what you see on the lower left was artist's depiction of Pardo's push. They were coming off of a target in North Vietnam. His wingman flamed out. He wasn't about to have him eject over enemy territory. He ordered his wingman to drop his tail hook, which he did, and Bob got underneath that airplane and put that tail hook right on his canopy and pushed him out of North Vietnam across the border into Laos, where the 2-man crew ejected and were successfully rescued. Of course, Bob in the process flamed out himself and had to punch out. He and Steve were rescued as well. Now, I made that sound real simple, but that's one of the most amazing feats of flying that's ever happened. Our second flight of F-4s was Ballot Flight, and flying Ballot 1 was Major Phil Combies, one of our flight commanders at the 433rd. He had 2 MiG kills in Vietnam, and his backseat pilot, Dan Lafferty, who was my roommate at U-Bahn and had been through all those different places that Norm and I had been together. He had been with us that whole trip as well. So back to the mission itself. We took off from U-Bahn over here in Thailand, flew across Laos and the northern part of South Vietnam into the South China Sea, and we hooked up with the KC-135 tankers to refuel heading north. We dropped off the tankers, went between Hainan Island, which is Chinese territory. We didn't want to get too close to that and provoke their MiGs to come up. And we wanted to stay far enough off the coast, out of the range of the coastal guns, and proceeded up north, up in this area up there, and switch to another map. So blown up, and our target was Kep, which is on the Northeast Railroad that ran from Hanoi up into China. Haiphong Harbor, the main port in North Vietnam, is right there. So we came up north after dropping off the tankers and turned west up about halfway between Haiphong and the Chinese border, and came in a little bit northeast and then turned southwest on the bombing run towards Kep. Well, we ran into one heck of a bunch of MiGs that day, and it's not certain still how many of them there were. There's a lot of different reports. I saw one report that said there were 24, another said there were 25, another said there were 28. The citation that accompanied the DFC that I was awarded for that mission said that I was outnumbered 10-1. Be quite honest, I wasn't sitting there with my checklist saying, yeah, there's a MiG over there. Yeah, there's 2 more over there. No, you're not counting them in a situation like that. But years after the fact, when a number of the members of that whole gaggle got together and talked about it, as near as we can determine, there were probably 32 or 33 MiGs that we encountered. They were flying in 2 separate Lufberry circles, or also called a defensive wheel. It's like the old pioneers of the West circling the wagons. This is strictly a defensive formation that the MiGs were flying. And the concept is that if you as an American airplane are trying to attack a MiG in that circle, the first thing that happens is the next MiG in the circle is on your tail. So it's a difficult formation to penetrate successfully. And we were about 40 miles outside of Kep when I heard Major Combes in ballot flight, who was up at the very front of the Thud force, call out that I've spotted MiGs. They're out of my range, so I'm going to leave them for Tampa flight. So that, by the way, is the last radio transmission I heard. The reason is because right after that, Jack Van Loon and I lost our radio, and we didn't yet know it. And you cannot fight a dogfight in an F4 without a radio because you cannot see your own 6 o'clock. Not only that, but we were flying number 2 on Robin Olds' wing, and it's our responsibility to let him know what's happening behind him. And we couldn't do that because we didn't have a radio, but we didn't yet know it. All I can think of in the minutes following that was our flight is really practicing good radio discipline, because usually there's an awful lot of excited chatter and something like this, and nobody was saying a word. Well, they were, I just didn't hear it. The two Lufberry circles, one was right down on the deck, about 100 foot off the deck, and the other one was up at our run-in altitude, which was about 15,000 feet. And I had my head down on the, after I heard that radio call from Phil Combes, I had my head down in the cockpit trying to find these MiGs on the radar. I never could. And when what the MiGs were trying to do was come in on the tail end of the Thuds. If they could shoot them down, fine. It was usually just a quick pass by, a shot, and get out of there, because they didn't want to get engaged in dogfights. But if they couldn't shoot one down, they at least hoped to cause the Thuds to jettison the bombs. And that was a real problem that Colonel Wells had mentioned, one of the things we were facing. And so the armament that the MiG-17s were carrying, they had two 23-millimeter guns and a 137-millimeter cannon, and some of them were modified to carry either one or two A-12 missiles, the Russian heat-seeking missile. Well, my head was down in the cockpit, and I didn't see anything, and I wasn't hearing anything, and I had just put my head up, and first thing I see is Robin has taken us right through the middle of that upper Lufberry circle. I don't know if that was the right thing to do or not, considering the purpose of that defensive wheel, but that was probably the smartest thing he could have done, because it really caught those MiGs by surprise. It scattered them, and it broke up their entire intent for the day. And so Robin rolled in on the tail of two MiGs on the opposite side of the circle. And as soon as he did that, the next two MiGs in the circle rolled right in on his tail. And we're talking about a close-in dogfight. I mean, we were really, really close. Colonel Wells mentioned, the separation you have to have for a Sparrow missile to be effective. It was almost a mile separation you had to have. We were in a close-in dogfight and no guns. If we had guns that day, it would have been zip, one dead MiG, zip, two dead MiGs. It would have been that simple, because Jack and I rolled right in on the tail of those two MiGs that were on Robin's tail. Well, I'm screaming to Robin Olds, Tampa 1, break right, you got two MiGs on your tail. Although, frankly, I was using a word a little more colorful than tail, but you get the picture. And he did not respond. And that's when I figured out we don't have a radio. And so Jack Van Loon said to me, Joe, can you get a lock on? And I said, no, Jack, we're too close. And he said, well, I'm going to try to fire a missile across their bow to scare them off. So we slid out to the right and angled our nose in, and he bore-sighted a Sparrow missile right across the bow of those two MiGs that were on Robin's tail, and it worked. That got their attention big time. They broke hard left and down and disappeared from the fight. And that allowed Robin to press on his attack. He had no idea all this was going on behind him, and it actually was years later before he found out, because unfortunately Jack and I got shot down on the mission and didn't come home to give the debrief. But Robin was in a world of hurt, didn't know it, and we saved his tail that day. Well, since our Sparrow missile was not guiding, it went ballistic over the horizon. And the next thing I see is right on its tail is an ATOL missile, the Russian heat seeker, following our missile. I mean, that was quite a sight to see two missiles following each other over the horizon. Well, that got my attention. So where the heck did that come from? I crane around as hard as I can in my cockpit to see what's back there, and there's two MiGs on our tail. And they were starting to fire, pulse fire their 23 millimeters, and it looks like big red golf balls going by the canopy, going by both sides of the canopy, over the canopy. And so Jack immediately put us into a 4G climb and turn. Why those 23 millimeters didn't hit us, I don't know, but they missed. We went into a 4G climb and turn, lost the two MiGs. They couldn't stick with us in that maneuver, and I glanced down to my right and watched them just kind of flutter out of my view. And I looked back down at the cockpit, and I saw our airspeed indicator was down to 250 knots, which is not a good thing in the dogfight. And I said to Jack, watch your airspeed. And he started to push the nose over to get some energy back. And here come two MiGs from our 2 o'clock high, firing their 37 millimeter cannon, which looked like yellow tracers. And so Jack, we didn't have much maneuverability or airspeed at that time, but Jack broke hard into them to try to get them to overshoot us, which essentially they did, but not before they put two of those 37 millimeters into our aft fuselage, where Hector talked about all that gas that's sitting back there. And I could both feel the thump thump and hear the thump thump of those hits. And sorry, one behind me. And Jack said, "Oh, Joe, we've been hit." And I said, "Yeah, I know it." And then for some reason I asked him, how bad are we hit? I didn't need to ask that because every light on our idiot panel was lit up. I mean, our inside of our cockpit looked like a Christmas tree, including both engine fire warning lights were on. And Jack said, "My stick is frozen," so I instinctively grabbed my stick and said, my stick's frozen too. And he said, "Joe, we have to get out." And I said goodbye and pulled the handle. There was no reason to be waiting around after that. I mean, airplane wasn't flying, and he didn't have to tell me twice. But the last thing I saw as I was reaching for that handle and before the canopy blew, here come two more MiG-17s diving on us from our 10 o'clock with their 37 millimeter cannons firing, trying to finish us off. Not that we needed to be finished off, because we were done at that point. So back to the question of how many MiGs did we encounter? Well, I can't confirm what everybody else saw. I can only tell you what I saw. There were the two MiGs that Robin attacked. There were the 2 MiGs on his tail, that's 4. The 2 MiGs on our tail, that's 6. The 2 MiGs coming from 2 o'clock high that eventually hit us, and the 2 MiGs coming from 10 o'clock high. That's 10. That's 10 MiGs that we were engaged all in one very intense dogfight. Now I'm going to switch gears just for a moment to talk about what some of the other people say. I mean, I like to talk about only what I saw, but somewhere in that whole sequence, Robin was attacked by 2 more MiGs, and Bob Pardo had screamed on the radio. Of course, I heard none of this. Tampa lead, break left, break left. Robin said, I knew what that meant. And so he hit Bernard and pulled back hard on his stick and went into a climb. And when he looked back over to his right shoulder to see what was going on, he said there he saw my airplane going straight up in the air, and flames coming out the rear. And then he saw two seats and 2 parachutes. Bob Pardo said that when he saw us, he said our airplane was a big fireball. We had flames shooting out the front of the airplane 100 feet. We had flames shooting out the rear of the airplane 200 feet. Ballot flight, the other flight of F-4s that was up at the front of the strike force, they had gotten involved in their own separate little dogfight, and Ballot 1 shot down a MiG, and they were coming back. The thuds hit the target and were coming back off the target, and Ballot flight was coming with them, and Ballot flight went right through the middle of our dogfight, and Dan Lafferty in the back seat of Ballot 1 said he saw my airplane. He says all he saw was a great big fireball. He could see the nose of that F-4 on the front of the fireball and the tail of the F-4 on the back of the fireball. And he said next thing he saw were 2 ejection seats coming up out of the fireball and then 2 chutes. He didn't know it was me that was hit until he got back on the tanker. And then there was a report written by one of the Thud pilots on that mission that said when he was coming back out of the target area and flew through the dogfight, he saw this big fireball explode as well, and he was really down in the dumps until he got back home, because he thought that was a 105 that got shot down, but it wasn't. It was me. So there were a lot of people that saw our airplane go up in flames. It's interesting that I never saw any flames in the cockpit. Never saw any smoke, but when I pulled that ejection handle and went out, I couldn't hear anything. All I could see, I couldn't see anything, except all I could see was red, because I became a fireball myself. And I guess I was fortunate, we figure we were probably about 15,000 feet when we bailed out. The radar altimeter in our seats were set for 14,000 feet. And so I didn't free fall very long before the chute opened. And as you've heard the description already twice here today, when that parachute opened, and it's just a loud opening snap. And when that parachute opened, I think the combination of the opening snap and the thin air at that altitude, it snapped out the flame, because I was just engulfed in flame and snapping. They were gone. Now I got burned pretty bad, and we're going to talk about that here a little bit later. But we got out, and we're coming down in our Jack and I were. Jack probably got out about a second behind me, and we were virtually side by side in our parachutes, all all the way down. Well, now in the meantime, Bob Pardo is still fighting a dog fight. And so is Robin Olds. He's off somewhere too. He eventually shot down two of those MiGs. And I'm floating down but Jack and I are floating down in our parachutes. And the next thing I see, here come two MiGs on a gunning pass, shooting at us, trying to shoot us right out of the chute. And they went right behind us, and right on their tail was Bob Pardo. And he chased them off of us, and he had to make a quick jog to the right and back to avoid running right over top of us. And he went by right in front of me. He estimates about 200 feet from us. All I know is he was so close that despite the fact that he was wearing a visor and oxygen mask, I had no problem recognizing that was Bob Pardo and Steve Wayne in that cockpit. And as Bob went flying by, I waved, and he rocked his wings in acknowledgement. And that's the last I saw of Bob Pardo for 10 years. Next time I ran into him was out here in front of the Taj Mahal at a Freedom Flyer reunion. He was here for that. And when he spotted me out there, he came running over and gave me a big hug. And the first thing he said to me was, "Hoss, you crazy SOB, why did you wave to me when I flew you?" And I said, "Well, I just wanted to let you know I was okay." And of course, being okay was a matter of perspective. I was a long ways from being okay. Well, Bob stayed in the fight until all the thuds had left the area. Bob fired all 8 of his missiles. One was a dud. One was, he saw a hit target, confirmed kill. But the other 6 missiles, every time he fired one, he had to break off the attack either to attack another MiG or avoid one that was attacking him, and never got to follow them. So we don't know if he hit any more MiGs or not, but this artist depiction up here shows some, oops, got the wrong button here, shows some fires burning on the ground. And Bob and Steve said that when they exited the target area, they counted 5 fires burning on the ground. They always assumed that one of them was my airplane, and one was the MiG that they confirmed to have killed, and one was the first MiG that Robin Olds killed. So that's 3. That leaves 2 more. If I counted correctly, that leaves 2 more fires unaccounted for, and one of them could not have been Robin Olds' second MiG because he hadn't shot it down yet. And many people believe that one of those 5 fires was the MiG that Phil Comby shot down, but Phil says no, that's not possible because he said he was 24 miles up in front of us when he shot his down. So there's it looked like there were two MiGs might have been burning on the ground that never got claimed because they were never confirmed. Robin Olds has written in a number of places about this dogfight, and his description says it all. You know, he said this is one of the most intense dogfights he's ever been in, and this comes from a triple ace. He says it was just MiGs and F4s turning round and round, and that's exactly what was going on. He said it was like an old-fashioned World War II Wooferdale. And he said the one lesson he learned from that is you don't attack 16 MiG-17s with 4 F4s. Well, he was stating that based upon the fact that we started out with 4 airplanes in the flight. But before he attacked, Pardo and his wingman had already split off as a separate element to attack MiGs coming up out of the lower circles that were going after the thuds. And Robin didn't realize at the time he said that there were actually twice that many MiGs. So we actually had 4 F4s attacking 32 MiGs, maybe 33, because Robin said that there was a lone MiG in the lower circle that looked like it was down there directing traffic. Well, I got shot down, but it wasn't all bad news because the thuds put all their bombs on target. No thuds or support aircraft lost. My airplane was the only one that was shot down. We survived, the target did not. How do I know that? Because once I was captured, I had a 2-day Jeep ride to Hanoi. And on the second day, we went right past the railroad yards. The driver stopped the Jeep, and the guards in there started shaking their fist at me and pointing at the railroad yards, which looked like the craters of the moon. It was completely destroyed. So there I was on the ground, been trained as a FAC, doing real live bomb damage assessment. And I don't have a radio to call it in, but I knew, and believe me, that was a point in my life where I needed something to feel good about. That was a feel-good moment. I guess I must have had a grin from ear to ear, and those guards tried to wipe that off my face, and to no avail. I smiled all the way to Hanoi. Once I got to Hanoi, however, they quickly wiped the smile off my face. So yeah, we survived. Jack eventually became Freedom Flyer 141. I became Freedom Flyer 162. When they captured us, they took us down 2 opposite sides of the mountain. You see from that picture there, I think Jack went down the good side of the mountain because I don't remember getting treated that well on the side they took me down. Well, we weren't the only ones to survive. Of note is the fact that Robin Knowles' airplane that day both survived the war, survived the boneyard at Davis-Monthan, and now sits in the Air Force Museum at Wright-Patterson for all to see, with 2 stars on its side signifying the 2 MiGs that he shot down in that dogfight. Not only that, but Tampa 3 also survived and now sits on a pedestal in front of the VFW Hall in Fairfield, Indiana, with a MiG on its engine intake cowling to signify the 1 confirmed kill that airplane had. So I make it to the Hanoi Hilton. I learn the tap code, and first person I get to try the tap code out on is in the cell next to me. It's Jeremiah Denton, and Jerry is passing along the names of all the POWs that were in the Hanoi Hilton at the time. There were about 80 of us at that time. And much to my surprise, were Bridger and Gray. And when he tapped those names through the wall to me, I literally fell off the bed in a big thump. And he started pounding on the wall, wanting to know, are you all right? What happened? And I get back on my bed and told him, but they're dead. I saw them die. There were 30 of us saw them die. And he said, nope, they're here. Bridger came home to be Freedom Flyer number 15. Gray came home to be Freedom Flyer number 73. And if there's a moral of that whole story, that is what you see in combat, or what you think you saw, is not always what happened. And it's a much longer story of why 30 people saw them die and they didn't. So if you want to know the rest of the story, see me later. Okay, now I'm going to switch gears, talk a bit about injuries and some of the other health issues that we were dealing with in North Vietnam. And some people got injured during shoot down, some during the capture process, some during the torture. A lot of people, all three of the above. Plus, we dealt with diseases. There are a number of different epidemics that went through the prison camps. There was a pink eye epidemic at one time, flu epidemic. We had skin ailments, which were difficult to deal with. Parasites, almost everybody had intestinal parasites, came home with intestinal parasites. Many people, two or three different types of intestinal parasites. Dental problems, because we weren't able to get our regular dental checkup once or twice a year. And then there were the constant beatings and tortures that went on for years during captivity that were a source of more injuries. Well, I'm going to talk about some of these injuries that occurred, and I'm just going to do it from a first-hand account. There were between 600 and 700 POWs in Vietnam, and each have their own story, and I'm only going to tell you about some of the ones that I witnessed firsthand. That first month that I was in captivity, I was placed in a cell in the Hanoi Hilton called the Tet Room, which was a large room that they were using as an infirmary for seriously injured POWs. And there were 5 of us in that room at the time. Tom Sterling was the EWO in the backseat of a F-105 Wild Weasel airplane. Navy Lieutenant J.G. Gary Anderson was a radar observer in the backseat of a Navy F-4B. Commander Red McDaniel, Navy A-6 pilot. Lieutenant J.G. Bill Metzger, a Navy F-8 pilot, and myself. And you'll notice three of those people shot down on the 19th of May, 1967. That was a bad day for the Navy. They lost so many airplanes and crew members on that day that it's still to this day referred to as Black Friday. And since I was shot down the next day, that's how I still 50 years later remember I was shot down on a Saturday. And I was always glad that those guys came before me, because by the time I got to Hanoi and started torturing me, the torturers were starting to get tired of it. Well, let me talk about each individual. Tom Sterling broke both femurs when he punched out of his F-105. And for the most part, we as a group did not get a whole lot of medical attention in North Vietnam. Tom was one of those exceptions. When they captured him, they took him right to the hospital in Hanoi and performed surgery on his 2 broken legs, one of which was a compound fracture. Inserted pins in both legs, albeit one of them that got misaligned a little bit, so he had one foot that stuck out to the side the rest of captivity, intended to walk in a circle, not on purpose. But Tom spent a month in that hospital, and when he came out of surgery, he said he saw the doctor giving instructions to one of the guards, and had a glass of milk in his hand, and was telling the guard, you know, this glass of milk goes to Tom Sterling twice a day. So Tom said after that, he got a glass of milk twice a day for 30 days. Okay, that's the good news. Bad news is something got lost in the translation. That's the only thing he got to eat for 30 days, were those 2 glasses of milk. So when he finally got put into the Hanoi Hilton and into the Tet Room with the rest of us, regardless of the fact that our diets at that time were pretty meager and not very good, but he was happy to get something to eat for a change. Red McDaniel was a real basket case. He suffered a smashed knee during ejection. He also crushed 2 of his vertebrae, tortured. He got one of his arms badly damaged. And he was bedridden. He really couldn't get around, but whenever he did try to get around, this guy looked like a zombie. First of all, he had this ashen color to his face. He had one arm, he was hunched over because of the back injury. He got that dangling arm, which is dragging the ground, the fingertips dragging the ground, and he's dragging a foot. He truly looked like a zombie. And he got no medical attention for it. Bill Metzger was the worst case. Bill in his F8 took a shrapnel hit right in the side of the cockpit. He fractured his right femur, and he got a little bit of medical attention in the beginning. Vietnamese pulled a 2-pound chunk of shrapnel out of his other leg that left the gash so big that you could see the exposed bone in his leg, and that gash ran almost from his knee to his hip. It's just a huge gaping wound in his leg. They inserted 3 staples in that leg, which they just ripped out right away. That didn't work very well at all. He also had shrapnel wounds in both arms, both the upper and lower parts of his arms, and they become badly infected. And the Vietnamese were so convinced that Bill Metzger was not going to survive that they did not even issue him any clothing. He laid there in a bed naked for the better part of a year. And when we were placed in that room together, it was already too late to do anything about Bill's broken leg. We tried, but the bones had started to fuse overlapping. And Bill was 6'1" when he was shot down, and depending on which leg he was standing on, he was only 5'10" part of the time. Trying to keep Bill's wounds clean was a full-time job, but the good news is he survived. And there was me. I got burned pretty bad when I jumped out of that airplane. I was flying with my flight suit sleeves rolled up, and there's a reason why you don't do that. This uniform is there to protect you, but Thailand was an awful hot place, and it wasn't that uncommon to have your sleeves rolled up, and I never put them back down. My hands didn't get burned because my gloves protected them, but I got burned on both forearms, 360 degrees around, from my wrist almost to my elbows on both arms. And that picture up there is a very good depiction of exactly what my arms look like, except for me, it was all the way around. It just completely burned off my skin, 3rd-degree burns. My face also got burned. I had a combination of 1st and 2nd-degree burns on my face and my neck. My eyebrows were completely singed off. My eyelashes were completely singed off. And the worst part of the face was the edges of the nose and the lips and the edges of the ears. It took them a long time to heal up. But the burns were the worst thing. When I got tortured, rolled around in the dirt, my burns got infected, and got to the point where one day guard opened the cell door and had a handkerchief over his mouth. I smelled so bad. I didn't smell it because I was living with the odor, 24/7. But that worried me. I didn't know much about medicine at the time, but I was really afraid that if the infection went systemic, I was going to die. And I remembered a lecture that I had in Air Force Survival School. And that is, if you have a combat injury and you can't get medical attention, let the flies get at it. And good news, we had lots of flies in Vietnam. And so I up to that point, I kept chasing them away. So I let the flies get at my arms. They laid their eggs all over my arms. Maggots hatched out within about an hour, and they started working on my arms. Now, maggots will not eat live flesh. They only eat the dead, decaying flesh. And so over the course of 3 days, I couldn't see what was going on under there. I just had these big bulbous wriggling mass on each forearm, and it took them about 3 days to get fully engorged. And somebody asked me once, well, how do you know they were done? And I said, well, I was born on and raised on a dairy farm. I've seen lots of animals with wounds infected by flies. I know when a fly is done. And so when the time came, the next step in the procedure taught in survival school was to flush the maggots off of the wound with sterile fluid. Well, this is Hanoi, okay, in a prison cell. We didn't even have the minimum of hygiene, let alone any kind of sterile fluid. The closest thing to sterile fluid I had was midstream urine. And so that's what I did. I used midstream urine to flush off those maggots. And when I got rid of them all, you wouldn't believe how my forearms lit. The cleanest job of debriding that you could imagine, bright, pink, glistening flesh on both arms. Now, the third part of the instruction is you wrap it with sterile gauze. Well, we didn't have any of that in Hanoi either. In fact, like some of these other gentlemen, I was stripped down when I was captured. The only article of clothing that I still had was my Batman t-shirt, and that's a long story we won't get into. They never took it away from me, don't know why, but it was white cotton cloth, reasonably clean yet at that point, so I ripped it up into strips, wrapped my arms, and my arms healed up. The skin grew back, I got hair grow back, pores, I got pigmentation, and front row may be able to see the scar lines on my arms. The rest of you probably can't, but at a distance you wouldn't ever know that I was burned. And every once in a while I go to a dermatologist that I hadn't seen before and checks me over, and I look at my arms and say, oh, you've been burned. And I say, yes, sir. And he said, well, somebody did one heck of a job of skin grafting on you. And I say, nope, it's maggots. Well, the shoot down injuries weren't my only injuries. I got tortured like so many people did. Because of my arms, they couldn't cuff me, so they tied my arms just above the elbows, tied the two elbows together behind my back. You can see they don't fit. The human body is not designed to do that. And but they made my elbows touch. They put shackles on my ankles, took a rope from my elbows up over my shoulders, put it around the shackles on my ankle, and cinched me up and rotated my shoulders until my elbows were up above my head. And human body's not designed to do that either. Ended up dislocating both of my shoulders. And they left the ropes on my arms too tight and too long, and so I ended up with ulnar neuropathy. If you strike it, that's your funny bone. Makes your hand, your palm, the heel of your hand and your fingers tingle. I had pins and needles in my hands and fingers for 6 months following that. Took that long to heal up. No medical attention for me in all of that. Gary Anderson was probably the best shape of everybody. Didn't get injured on shoot down, but he did get injured pretty bad during torture, particularly his ankles. they left those shackles on too long, and he got a lot of soft tissue damage in his ankles. They were so swollen up that he could not walk, so he was bedridden too. And he got hit in the right ear one time too many with the butt of a rifle, ruptured his eardrum, got infected, crusted over, and of all the injuries of all of us in that room, that was probably the worst, that ear infection, because the fluid kept building up in that ear. He had this constant throbbing, this constant pain, and there's nothing worse than a real bad headache that you can't make go away, and that's what he had. And I told him the way my mother always treated me when I had an earache on the farm was she'd get out a Q-tip and poke at my ear and repuncture the eardrum to release the pressure, and she'd pour a bunch of hydrogen peroxide in my ear to clean everything up and clean it out and disinfect it some. And of course, we had no hydrogen peroxide in the or Q-tips as far as that goes in the Hanoi Hilton, but peeing on my arms worked so good that I suggested to Gary that, why don't you let me pee in your ear? And, he was going to hear nothing about that. That wasn't going to happen. Well, so I said, okay, you're on your own. I tried, but the pain in his ear just kept getting worse and worse. And finally, he got to the point he could take it no longer. No, he wasn't going to let me pee in his ear. He was going to pee in his own ear. And, as bad as the other four of us were injured, we mustered up all the strength we could to line ourselves up on the foot of our bed, because there's not a lot going on in those prison cells in Hanoi. I mean, this was a real happening, watching some guy try to pee in his own ear. Okay, so, fortunately, I'm running out of time. I can't describe exactly how that happened, but just let me say that he was successful. I still don't believe it. Okay. This is my final slide. I wanted to just mention a few other people that I lived with during the course of captivity, and just to give you some more indication of what people suffered through, not just the injury, but the long-term effects of the injuries. Fred Cherry broke a bunch of ribs when he was shot down. He got some medical attention. They actually put a upper body torso cast around him. He said that's the worst thing they could have done, because here you are, tropical environment, sweating like crazy, not getting baths. He was starting to itch like crazy underneath that cast. He couldn't reach it. He said that was worse than any of the torture that he received. And I lived with Fred later in captivity, and even after 3 or 4 years, every once in a while he'd start to cough, and he would cough up a sliver of bone, part of one of the ribs that he broke. John Pitchford. John was one of my personal heroes, because he broke his right humerus. Didn't just break it; it got shattered. He had no bone in the upper arm, and so it just hung down pretty much useless for 7.5 years. Now, we all had our demons. We all had our miseries that we had to tolerate in order to survive, and John had to do that along with the rest of us, but he did it with a dangling arm for 7.5 years and never once complained, never. Big inspiration to me personally. Jack Rollins was a very interesting case. He was a RO in the backseat of a Navy F-4B. They were hit. The airplane was still somewhat flying, but not very well. They were close to the coast. They were going to try to make it out to sea before they punched out. They came up just a little bit short They weren't going to make it. His aircraft commander gave him the command to eject, and they were in a nose down. Aircraft commander got out okay, got one full swing of the parachute before he hit the ground. Jack, on the other hand, got out second. He was too low, never had a chute. Hit the ground without a chute. Fortunately, he hit the ground, was a rice paddy. He survived it. Really messed up his back. And he had back pains the rest of captivity. But the very fact that he was alive is just a miracle. And I'm going to end up with Kevin McManus, a longtime roommate of both myself and Ed Meckenbauer. Where you at, Ed? Sitting in the back. Ed is my witness of this story. Kevin, typical of an F4 ejection, had spinal compression, sciatica. That's the nerve that goes down your hip and into your foot. And he really had severe sciatic pain, complaining so much that we finally yelled for the guards, and they came and looked at what was going on there. And much to our surprise, they went off, and they came back a couple hours later with a couple medics who were going to treat Kevin for his sciatica using traditional Oriental medicine. They had with them this great big tub of boiling hot seaweed. They stripped Kevin down, laid him on his side with the bed side up, the bed leg up, and packed that really hot seaweed all over his hip and thigh, and they left it there until it cooled off. And then they took the seaweed off, and they came in with this great big pan of molten wax, molten candle wax. And they poured that onto Kevin's bare buttocks, and it ran down into every crack and crevice of what my dear old mother would have called his nether region. And when that hot wax hit Kevin's nether region, he let out this ear-splitting scream that I think was heard in every prison camp in Hanoi. Now, did that ever work to cure Kevin's sciatica? I don't know. All I do know, and Ed will attest to, he never complained again the rest of the 6 years he kept it. And with that,
Thank you so much, Colonel Milligan. Imagery. Okay, so our final speaker is Tom McNish, Colonel, United States Air Force, retired. One of very few pilot physicians. Colonel McNish has flown the T-37, the A-10, the AT-38, and the F-105. Shot down during his 43rd combat mission, Colonel McNish was repatriated after 6.5 years as a POW. Additionally, Colonel McNish played a key role in the repatriation of Desert Storm POWs. In his job with Biodynamic Research Corporation, he has conducted over 2,000 accident investigations. Colonel McNish is decorated with 3 Silver Stars, Legion of Merit, Distinguished Flying Cross, and Bronze Star with Valor. So please join me in welcoming Colonel McNish.
Well, I do not have any stories about people peeing in their ears, so I hope this doesn't bore you. Actually, it says up there her name is Colonel McNish. Actually, it should be Paul Harvey, because this is going to be the rest of the story. I will try to get through it and as efficiently as possible. I hope to be able to leave you guys some time to ask questions. Maybe we can stick around for a little bit after, but let's move on with it. You know, you've heard about the combat stories and so forth this afternoon. And my purpose is to give you, as I said, the rest of the story, which is homecoming and the effects that it had on us and the effects that our group has experienced post-release. In the midst of that, I'm going to try to give you some pointers as to what has been determined by the experts to have been the key factors in our successful return and the success that we have seen. And I'll throw in a little bit about what Tom McNish's ideas are on that too. So to get right into it, you can't have a homecoming, of course, unless you have a going away. And that was my going away vehicle. Great airplane. And it was just one hell of a lot of fun to fly. Not with that load because you didn't have enough gas to go anywhere, but you could still carry 2 450 drops and 8 750-pound bombs, and you could just have all kinds of fun with that. Or you could carry a 650 centerline and 2 3,000-pound bombs, which actually make mushroom clouds when they hit the ground. So it was impressive, and I made it to my 45th mission. So I say I got 44 and a half missions. And on that mission, and I'm not going to go into any details about it, except that it was a worthless mission. It was to get a mission count for Robert Strange McNamara. But anyway, this airplane turned into that airplane. Now, you've seen a lot of airplane paintings of burning airplanes. As best we've been able to track it down from the film that was recovered by the filmmakers for Return with Honor, the documentation of the date that that film was taken and where it was taken, that is actually my airplane. So you get one picture of a real airplane. It's not as dramatic maybe as some of the drawings. And from there, I spent quite a bit of time, as you heard, getting a vacation at the Hanoi Hilton. And the most common question that I get, and I'm going to skip all of the details because you've heard enough of that today. The most common question I get is, how did you do it? Usually followed by, I couldn't do that. The immediate answer is, yes, you could. None of us who were up there were hand-selected to be successful prisoners of war. We were randomly shot out of the sky as a sampling of those who were fighting the war up there in the air. And so the answer, I couldn't do that. You've got 96% of those 500 and some airmen who were shot down up there that served their country honorably and returned with their honor intact. So yes, you could. How I did it, in my mind, there were 3 things that contributed to that. One was faith, which I determined to kind of divide up between faith and God. That's dependent upon each individual as to how they felt. Faith in country, which is key, people. This is key. And let me go address that from one aspect. Whenever you see the patch that says, "We will never forget," the POWs, the MIAs, it is absolutely essential that we pursue the fullest possible accounting until there is absolutely no way anybody else's remains could be left over there. If you find somebody alive, that's a bonus, but I don't think that's ever going to happen, particularly at this time. But if we don't pursue the fullest possible accounting, how can I look at these young people or those of you who are on active duty and say, regardless of what you do, if you serve your country, you will never be forgotten. You will return home. And it is that faith was major in being able to get me to survive. Faith in myself that I was not going to give it up, and a faith in my fellow prisoners that became absolutely reinforced every day that I was there. I never encountered a single time when I couldn't count on my buddies that I was in contact with, my roommates, to do whatever was necessary to help me get through whatever I had to do. And even including some people telling their buddies to pee in their ear. Wow, that's a good story, Joe. All right, second thing that I felt was key to being through it was ingenuity. We found ways to make do with what we had. Now, ingenuity, you've heard about that since day one. I've got a simple definition for it. It's taking whatever you have and making out of it what you need. Now, that applies to the tap code. It's called the tap code, but it can also be the cough code or the break bricks code, or any other thing that you can imagine that you can do to use that same concept to get messages across. Things that you can do to make games to play, cards to look at, dice out of clay. There's just so much that we did with ingenuity. We were always able to outthink our enemy. And then lastly was just absolutely gut determination that I wasn't going to let him beat me and that I was going to come home. Now, those are Tom McNish's answers to how we did it. The professionals have looked at it for a lot of time after we got home. And they have come up with several things, and coping skills that they found have worked for the most of us was having an internal standard of behavior against which you measured everything that you did. If you could say that I have done everything I could to maintain my honor and do what I must do in this situation, that was one of the keys. Loyalty, and you'll see a similarity there, but loyalty to country, loyalty to your family, knowing that you wanted to be able to look them in the face when you came home, and loyalty to your fellow prisoners, and I've already addressed that. Faith in God, as I addressed before, it was key to a lot of people. Some people it didn't work for them, it wasn't their thing, but it sincerely helped a lot of those who were able to lean on that type of faith. A healthy sense of humor. We found ways to find humor in an awful lot of the things that happened. And I like these guys standing around laughing at a guy. I don't want to keep going back to that story, but that's a great story. These guys standing around laughing at a guy trying to fix his hearing. There was a lot of healthy humor provided by the guards because they didn't know that we could look through little cracks in the door and observe a lot of the things that they were doing that they wouldn't have wanted us to see. And I'm not going to go into the details because this is a mixed audience. But, and having goals, starting from day one with the goal, A, to get the hell out of there at some point, B, to survive with your honor intact, and developing goals for what you were going to do after you got home. Those type of things proved to be extremely valuable. All of those helped to maintain the self-esteem, but believe it or not, when they did all the statistics and matched up all the things and looked for one characteristic that had more direct application and was more directly related to the ability to successfully survive the experience and move on with a future life, was optimism. Those who absolutely believed that they were going to get out, they were up. I was never more than 6 months from going home. In my mind, there was always something within the next 6 months that was going to get me home. And I had to revise that at least 11 times to get to 6.5 years. But that optimism remained. Now, we had a few who were totally pessimistic. They didn't believe that they were going to see the sun rise the next day. They would hide under their blankets and they were convinced that they were just going to die there. But you know what? If it's being right that counts, I was right. I came home. They were wrong. They came home too. But many of them have had more problems dealing with everyday life than those of us who were just a wild-eyed optimist. My wife says she's the realist, but anyway, I've maintained my optimism. And so that's what happened that's how we got through that. and only 2,373 days later. Now, if you look at it, it's exactly 6 years and 6 months. It's exactly 339 weeks. So it looks like a big number, but if you take it down to months and stuff, it's 78 months. Doesn't sound quite as bad as 2,000 days. Operation Homecoming kicked off. Operation Homecoming, people, was the finest military operation that I have ever been involved in my entire military career. It was that way because the senior leadership of our country had decided that it was going to be a no-holds-barred, all-out effort to return us in the proper way. It was also, even more importantly, successful because every single individual that was involved in that operation was personally and emotionally committed to making that operation succeed. We saw people, everything from flight attendants to the pilots, to the doctors, to the debriefers. Every one of them wanted to make sure that we had everything that we needed and that it was done successfully. Operation Homecoming started, this, for me, on the 4th of March, 1973. You saw pictures of the entrance to the Maison Centrale or the Hanoi Hilton or the Wallow Prison. This is that same entrance, only the good news is instead of being dragged through that door in shackles and ropes and taken to the torture room, we were walking out with our heads held high. We went from here, got on a old city bus, camouflage city bus, and in front of the prison, we were driven over to the Jialam airport, and I looked out the window of that bus and I saw the absolutely most beautiful airplane in the world. Now, if those of you who have notes or notepads, you can take this down because trust me, this is probably the only time you've ever heard a fighter pilot say that that was the most beautiful airplane in the world. That was something. From here, when we got off the bus, stood in line. This, by the way, is the first releasee. This is Ev Alvarez, first guy shot down. And that's Bob Shoemaker, the second guy captured. And that was the first time that they had faced and saluted an American officer in 8.5 years for Ev and almost 8 years for Shu. And so on the 4th of March, I got to be in a formation just like that, walk across in front of a table where there were Vietnamese officers, some of them the same ones that had directed our torture, on one end of the table, American officers on the other end of the table. I walked across and rendered a salute to an Air Force general that was standing there, and I was free. We got on the airplane, as you've heard, everybody cheered, and this is, my wife likes to point out that I happened to find the part of the airplane where the flight attendant was, the flight nurse, excuse me. Kind of the sad part about this is that of the 5 identifiable people standing in this group in that photograph, only 2 of us are still around today. So time has taken its toll on our group, but in those years, we've been a very successful group. The key elements to Homecoming, the thing that made it so successful, was that the entire operation was conducted under a positive, reinforcing, and supportive environment. Now, when you contrast that with the GIs that served their country just as honorably as we did in South Vietnam, and then they came home and they were afraid to keep their uniforms on. They were called baby killers. They were spit on. There's no doubt that when we came home to this positive, reinforcing, nurturing environment, we had every chance in the world of becoming successful that our country could give us. We got immediate access to medical care. This was done at Clark Air Force Base. We got rapid transport to Clark, and that was, what, about a 2.5-hour flight? I don't know. It seemed like it went by in a heartbeat. While we were there, there was no press, there was no access to family. We were put back in uniform immediately. We were provided with an escort whom we had served with prior to our shoot down, so that we had a familiar face and a familiar person to interact with. We got a chance to call home, and we were debriefed on, quote, time urgent issues, and 99% of that was, who do you know that's still there? Because they were trying to make damn sure that nobody got left behind. They put us in uniform so that we get us away from anything related to the prison as quickly as possible. They even had tailors there working all night to get us into Class A's and well, they don't call them that anymore, whatever you guys call them. But we had a nice set of properly fitted uniforms within 2 days. And then we were transported to a medical center nearest our hometown, a regional medical facility nearest to our home. And that was when I got back to Maxwell Air Force Base. You can tell from that we made a stop in Hawaii. But and this was my escort officer coming back. My mother who had been, she was my dependent. My father had passed away. I was the only child. And so she had waited that whole time for me to come home, even though she was severely crippled with rheumatoid arthritis and multiple other illnesses, spent 3 years in Wilford Hall here in town. And they thought she was never going to live from one day to the next, but she proved them wrong. She was sitting in a car just over where I was getting off of the C9. When we got to the phase 2, which was at this major regional medical center for each of us, different ones, still continued the basics, no press until we were ready to talk to the press. We had to spend time with our families. We got to stay in or near the medical facility and spend time with families. That's when we get the detailed debrief, when every day the intel guy comes and sits down with a tape recorder and says, okay, tell me everything you remember from day one, when you were shot down, all the way through your release. And they just kept that up until you were through. Now, the good news is I can tell you guys that the things that I tell you are true. At least there's only one small detail that I had revised in my memory from that debriefing, because I got the opportunity to read my original content, the full text of my original debriefing about 2 years ago. And I was astonished that after 40 years that there was only one thing that had been modified in my memory. It wasn't all that significant, but I corrected that, so now all my stories are true. In-depth, detailed resolution of all your medical issues, and finding ways to return you to society, tell you what all had been going on during the time that we were gone, trying to get us back into functioning as a functioning member of society, and get into the press only when you said you were ready to, and begin plans for the future. Well, I began my plans for the future when I got on the airplane out of Hanoi. As soon as we got wheels in the well, I located the flight surgeon on board and said, how do I go to medical school? And he says, you're crazy. You just spent 6.5 years in jail. You want to go to medical school? And I had to. And that was one of the goals that I had been working toward. The Air Force supported me the whole way. My country supported me the whole way, and put me through medical training and gave me the completion of a very satisfactory, very satisfying 30-year career. And they gave us all the leave time that we wanted to get our stuff together. Now, This is when I got home. That was my mom. That looks like a Christmas tree, but actually it was on March 15th, and it turns out that it was decorated with red, white, and blue ornaments made by all the school kids in my little town in the mountains of North Carolina. And that tree is still growing out in front of my house in North Carolina today. My mom survived to everybody's amazement, she survived for 1 day shy of a year after I got home. Now, it's like the movie Return with Honor. They went, and when they showed it, it ends up with homecoming and everybody's happy. And then, but they would get all the filmmakers would get all these questions. Where they go, okay, that's fine, but this is 26 years later that you're showing us this movie. Where are they now? What have they done? We've had fairly surprisingly good help. The Navy ran an exceptionally good program with a control match group to compare to the issues that they had versus and without being POWs and those of us who had. The most common diagnosis when we got home was not broken bones, it was not PTSD, it was worms. And that's treatable. So they all got us treated for our helminthiasis, if you will, our things that were growing in our body, and on we went with our life. The effects from capture injuries and from torture injuries mostly are bone joint issues. Some of us have developed arthritic changes and stuff and of course you can imagine some of the injuries that Joe was talking about have had long-lasting effect on some folks. But we had people who had one guy had a completely separated arm that was just hanging loose, almost like John Pitchford's. And when he got home, he got it repaired. It turns out his arm was about half to 2/3 the length it used to be from his shoulder to his elbow. Got back on flying status and finished out his career. The effects of torture, Joe's already talked to you about those as far as the nerve injuries and as far as the shoulder problems. Now let's talk about the malnutrition problems. The vast majority of us were able to recover from the malnutrition effects of the diets that we had. Some people, particularly some who were in one of the camps that was used considerably early on, developed dry beriberi and had problems with their vision, permanent problems with their vision, and also permanent problems with neurologic issues as far as damage to the nerves from the lack of B1. But if you want to ever believe in vitamin pills, you should have followed our care through our condition from the time in the first few years before the Vietnamese were even giving us packages from home. And after we started getting the packages, and in those were included some vitamin pills, and the health status, number of illnesses, number of colds, number of whatever you want, dropped dramatically when we started getting them. Even that we would have to cut them up in 4 pieces so we had enough to share with everybody in the cell. Psychological problems, we had a couple of suicides right after we got home. But since then, that has dropped off to practically zero. The psych tests say that we have slightly higher anxiety and depression across, not for everyone, but across the group. And surprisingly enough, only about 10% in the early phases after return developed any symptoms or signs of PTSD. Subsequent to the time when people started retiring and getting further along in life and losing some of those, had completed some of those goals, people started developing some delayed PTSD signs, but it's still a relatively low percentage of our group. You guys all know what that abbreviation stands for. In my humble opinion, And you can take that with a grain of salt because I'm not sure a fighter pilot ever had an humble opinion. But I firmly believe that the way Operation Homecoming was conducted, the way we were treated on return to our country was largely responsible for the results that we're seeing after we got home. Believe it or not, almost 80% of our guys remained on active duty until retirement, most in flying jobs. I had to stick in that there were 132 freedom flights by September 1974. I know because I was it. And virtually all of our group had a productive second career after their Air Force experience. 24 flag rank, 1 4-star, as you probably know. And, you know, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but we got a lot of folks in government too. And then there's some of us who got some letters after our names by going into advanced education, like some of the folks you've heard today. I think, with all sincerity, that the flying program, the recurrency program, the Freedom Flyer program, played a major part in the success of our group as we have continued to find ways to contribute to our country after we got home. And I'll just show you how I contributed. You see those 2 people standing there. One on the left is me. One on the right, at the time that picture was taken, I think had 2 bars on his shoulder. And it's my fault that he finished his Air Force career with 2 stars on his shoulder. Now, I couldn't do it for myself, but I did it for him. That was just one hell of a flight. I was dead set on going to medical school. I finished pre-med. I came out here for 2 days, ejection seat training fitted for my flight suit and everything. First day, flew the second day with Rod, and went home the next day and started med school the following week. But I got my freedom flight, and that was just one hell of a flight. Did you touch the stick? I don't know. Okay. Those vertical aileron rolls were fun. And the guy that made what I think is the most beautiful patch in the world, the best, most symbolically real patch in the world. Stand up, Charlie. The I-60 have had a big part in our subsequent success. And closing out with just my final message. Every returning combat veteran, not just every returning POW, every returning combat veteran deserves a homecoming based on these 3 points. And I think if there was one positive thing that ever came out of the Vietnam War, it is the fact that now today when I walk through an airport and I see people walking through it in their uniform, not being afraid to wear it, and have people time after time saying, thank you for your service, thank you for what you're doing. We learned from the Vietnam War that it is wrong to blame the soldier for the war. If you're gonna blame anybody, blame the government. But the soldiers are doing their job and they're serving with honor, and nobody should have been treated the way our South Vietnam brothers were treated, the ones that served in South Vietnam. Those principles, keep it, the positive philosophy in the homecoming, reinforce their strength, finds ways to maximize their ability to serve the country continuously, be supportive as they face the challenges. Some of the guys coming back from war have very significant challenges, and we need to make sure that we have resources to help them deal with those challenges. And we got to get our VA to where it's treating people in the right way and as soon as possible, and reinforcing and strengthening those people instead of just getting them tied to a medical system that may not be there to reinforce their abilities, but just to treat their symptoms. let's not ever again lose what we learned from Operation Homecoming. Thank you. Thank God for our country. Thank our country for what we do. And may we never forget that we have to keep the fullest possible accounting and maintain that through everything that we do, and continue to support our servicemen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Colonel McNish. So we've run up on our time. So if you have questions, our speakers will be in the bar at the Auger after 2100. So if you want to join them there, they would love to rub shoulders with you and tell more stories. Unfortunately, now we've run out of time, except we're going to do one more thing. This concludes our presentations. The 560th has a historic and important relationship with these POWs known as the Freedom Flyers. And I would like to take a moment to recognize those in attendance today. So as we call your name, please stand and be recognized, and then we'll hold applause until the end. Thank you. So Freedom Flyers in attendance today. Number 3, Colonel Retired Michael Brazelton. Number 17, Lieutenant Colonel Retired Bill Schwartfeger. Number 21, Lieutenant Colonel Retired John Blevins. Number 28, Lieutenant Colonel Retired Gene Smith. Number 34, Colonel Retired Leon Ellis. Number 40, Lieutenant Colonel Retired Ron Maston. Number 41, Captain Retired William Wilson. Number 50, Lieutenant Colonel Retired Tim Ayers. Number 60, Lieutenant Colonel Retired George Rose. Number 64, Major Retired Bob Jones. Number 82, Colonel Retired Julius Jaro. Number 86, Colonel Retired Thomas Norris. Number 91, Colonel Retired Kenneth Cordier. Number 97, Colonel Retired Elmo Baker. Number 98, Colonel Retired Ronald Webb. Number 106, Colonel Retired Dewey Waddell. Number 132, Colonel Retired Thomas McNish. Number 137, Lieutenant Colonel Retired Alan Brunstrom. Number 138, Colonel Retired Robert Barnett. Number 156, Colonel Retired Bob Hudson. Number 159, Major General Retired Ed Meckenbeer. Number 161, Colonel Retired Thomas Curtis. Number 162, Colonel Retired Joseph Milligan. Number 169, Colonel Retired Howard Hill. Number 172, Lieutenant Colonel Retired John Ewell. Number 175, Captain William Arcuri. Number 180, Colonel Retired Paul Robinson. Number 182, Colonel Retired Leroy Stutz. Number 195, Lieutenant Colonel Retired Jay Hess. Representing Freedom Flight number 196, Captain Retired Thomas Kloman. Number 197, Lieutenant Colonel Retired Jack Tremble. Number 198, Lieutenant Colonel Retired Tony Marshall. And additionally, we have other POWs in attendance, Lieutenant Colonel Retired Hector Acosta. Also, if there are any other POWs present that were not mentioned, please stand and be recognized. And let's give everyone that's standing a large round of applause. Thank you so much, gentlemen. You may have a seat. Again, our Freedom Flyers will be in the Auger Inn after 2100. So this concludes the 20th annual POW MIA Symposium. I would like to thank all of our presenters, gentlemen, for sharing your stories today, and for all of you who attended today's events. There's transportation outside in the back for Freedom Flyers to depart the Fleener. So thank everyone for your attendance, friends and family, and certainly again our presenters. We appreciate your time. So you guys are all dismissed. Have a great afternoon and a great weekend.